Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 53, I sat down with Captain Doug White in his office aboard Naval Air Station Pensacola. Captain White earned his wings of gold as a Naval Flight Officer in 2002, and he was selected to fly the EA-6B Prowler, where he deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom while assigned to Electronic Attack Squadron 135. Next, Captain White was chosen to attend Prowler Weapons School en route to Air Test and Evaluation Squadron 9, where he flew weapons test missions in the Prowler and developed the initial combat tactics for the then brand new EA-18G Growler. Captain White served as training officer at Electronic Attack Squadron 132, where he deployed to Iraq in support of Operation New Dawn, and then to Aviano, Italy, where he flew on Night 1 of Operation Odyssey Dawn, conducting combat operations over Libya. Next, Captain White served as a department head at VAQ-135, deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, before being selected to serve as executive officer and commanding officer at VAQ-132, where he led the squadron on an expeditionary deployment in the Western Pacific. Captain White currently serves as the Commodore of Training Air Wing 6, where he is the senior officer responsible with overseeing the Navy's primary, intermediate, and advanced flight training of all Naval Flight Officers and Navy and Marine Corps air vehicle pilots, in order to, quote, ensure global security, prosperity, and to project naval air power worldwide. Thanks as always for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 53, with Captain Doug White. Enjoy. Commodore, thank you again so very much for taking some time to sit down and chat. Start all the interviews the same way, so I want to start yours the same way as well. Where were you born?
Gemma, thanks for having me on here. I was born in the wilds of Missouri, so specifically Columbia, which, if you're familiar with Missouri, that's where the University of Missouri is. And so I was born there at the University of Missouri Med Center in 78.
1978, very cool. Where was the first look, the first touch toward the Navy and naval aviation? Why did you want to start this career and head this direction?
So I'm actually the fourth generation of my family to serve in the Navy. It goes all the way back to my great-grandfather, James White, who was a fireman first class on USS New York in World War I. I met him as an infant, but I have no memories of him. My grandfather, Hugh White, was a gunner's mate on the USS Pennsylvania, one of the old battleships that survived Pearl Harbor. They raised it. He was in the battle group with Admiral Oldendorf when they crossed the T in the Sarajevo Straits, 1944, leading into Mariana's Turkey Shoot. So I do have memories of a child as my grandpa commenting about a 4th of July fireworks celebration that he hadn't heard anything that loud since the Marianas. So I have a vivid memory of that as a child. My dad was a airframer on F-8s in Vietnam. He was in VF-111 and Sundowners working on F-8s. And then several of my uncles were also in the Navy. I'm the first officer, but that's honestly where it came from. We'd be at family functions, grandma and grandpa's for dinner on Sunday, and seemingly there'd always be some Navy story. With the exception of my Uncle Neil, who did retire after 23 years as an aviation machinist mate chief, everybody else did one enlistment and got out. And so I think subliminally at some level, I must have thought to myself, when they all get together, this is what they talk about. And it was only a couple years in their life, but it must have been fun enough or good enough at the time that they still talk about this. And so I think that's really where the inclination, initial, genesis of it came from.
That's incredible. What a heritage. So again, those stories I can only imagine being very, very inspiring. Okay, so like you said, going to go to the officer thing. What was the commissioning source? How'd you go about that initial process?
So Top Gun comes out in 1986.
I'm familiar, sir.
Yeah, right. So people don't realize what year it came out, right? So 1986 it comes out. I'm 8 years old. My Uncle Neil, who was, I think, in 81 at the time, gives me a VHS copy of this thing. And I just about wore it out. So at that point, I want to fly. There was a Navy recruiting commercial that came on the TV. And at the end of it is a guy, an officer, standing there in STBs with NFO wings on. And my dad pointed out to me that those were NFO wings. So I just always wanted to fly in the Navy. I don't know, people have told me in the past, well, hey, you're lucky because you've always wanted to know what you want to do with your life. But that was just my reality. And so as I moved into junior high, I started doing a little bit more research on what I needed to do, got into high school. I went to a very small high school in a very small town, Edina, Missouri. It's 1,000 people. I had 41 people in my high school class. So imagine a very small, consolidated county rural high school. There was a admissions catalog from the Naval Academy on the shelf, and all I could see was the spine of the little magazine that was the admissions catalog. So I pulled this thing out and asked the guidance counselor if I could, borrow it or whatever, and she said sure. And so I started reading this, and that's when I started thinking about the academy. I had a high school teacher, Joe Brandt, United States Army, Captain Joe Brandt, United States Army, retired because he flew both gunships and slicks in Vietnam, got shot down 3 times, found out after I graduated. He was my chemistry and physics teacher. And after I graduated high school, I went to his house because he was going to teach me some extra organic chemistry because I was going to go do this chemistry competition. And we never covered it in class. He never said boo about any of this. He was just always pushing Navy nuclear power. But when I got to his house, his shadow box was on the wall. And I'm talking DFC with cluster, silver star, like 3 Purple Hearts. And I didn't say anything. I just, I knew enough military at that point to recognize what some of those awards were. And so I newfound respect for Joe Brandt at that moment. But even before that, I still remember having this particular conversation. I was on my way out of the high school one day. School's over. And he had parking lot duty or something. So he's standing near the door. And I said something to him about, thinking about doing ROTC in college. And he said, why don't you just go to the academy? And I said, I don't know. That sounds pretty hard. And he said to me, he goes, I flew with West Point grads that were way dumber than you, so you'll be fine. I said, oh, okay, fine. So I think I kind of became his little project. He kind of guided me through some of the process within the local area there with the application process with the local congressman, the representative that was our district, and then the senator as well. So I ended up applying to Air Force, West Point, and Navy. I did not apply to Coast Guard. So I was accepted early by West Point, and I was all set to go to West Point. I was going to overnight my acceptance to West Point, and on my 18th birthday, I was on my way out the door to go to school, and the phone rang. So I go over to the big long corded phone that had 30 feet of cord on it, and pick this thing up, and it is the Congressman's office telling me that I got into the Naval Academy. So that's how I ended up going to the Naval Academy, was Joe Brandt, quite frankly. And I had the opportunity a couple years ago. I was back home for the annual fall festival my little town has, and he's since retired and moved to the Ozarks, but he was back for it, and I had the opportunity to say to him, don't ever wonder if you had a pivotal moment with somebody, because you did. That one conversation that one day put me on my entire path. So it was good for me to be able to tell him that, and I could tell he appreciated it.
If you had to choose one story to kind of sum up your time in Annapolis, what do you think you'd tell someone?
It's good to be from there. It's not good to be there.
I've heard that more than once.
Yeah. I have IHTFP engraved inside my ring. I hate this place. It is scrawled everywhere, all over the academy. And I told myself at the time while I was there, I was like, no, you're going to engrave this inside your ring. Because 20 years from now, you're going to look back with rose-colored glasses, and you're going to think, oh, that wasn't so bad. Yeah, I actually have I have a recurring nightmare that I am back at the academy as a plebe, and I'm in the passageways, like braced up, and people are yelling at me and stuff. And I'm like, no, hey, no, I'm a captain. What do you? No, I'm not. I did all this. I graduated from here. But yeah, I have this recurring dream that happens every once in a while. So I don't know. We need a dream analysis on that one. But
wow, what a way to say it. Okay, one thing that I'm not familiar with. I was an OCS guy. What's it like for service selection? You're going to be a SWO, a pilot, an FO, nuke, SEAL. There's all these different options. But how is it that you kind of put your preferences in? And how do you find out? What was that process getting down here before you were selected to come down to Pensacola?
Well, first of all, the academy makes unrestricted line officers. So you are going unrestricted line unless you are perhaps an athlete that blows out a knee or something like that during the course of your time there, at which point you'll go staff corps, restricted line, stuff like that. They do not make JAGs. They do not make doctors. They don't do that. So obviously they make Marine Corps officers as well. And so there's sort of this bifurcation that happens between folks that, and for some folks, they come in the door knowing they want to be a Marine, but others discover it along the way. And so there are certain summer trainings that if you do not attend, your chances of becoming a Marine are very slim. They use that as sort of an initial gauge how you doing in Marine Corps training. I did not desire to be a Marine for a variety of reasons, but for everybody else that's going in the Navy, you know that, if I choose nothing else, I will become a surface warfare officer. That is the default service selection that you're going to get. So otherwise, at my time, it was submarines, pilot, NFO, SEALs, EOD. EODs actually, at least for my class, was harder to get than SEALs. There was like 6 or 7 EOD slots and 16 SEAL slots. But pilot was out for me because of my eyes. I was almost legally blind, I think. I knew that there was an E at the top of the chart, but I couldn't read it. And that was before they accepted PRK or any sort of eye surgery for pilots. So that was out for me. And interestingly enough, I was going to be a submariner.
Not a lot of room on those, sir.
As I found out. So plebe year, go there, and it was a bit of a culture shock because I lived in a town of 1,000 people, and now I'm at a school where the student body is 4,000 people. So serious culture shock for me. I was the country bumpkin that showed up, and so was dealing with that, got through plebe year and everything, and chose marine engineering for my major, which is power generation and power transmission. Right. So you have to take 2 semesters of nuclear physics. I barely survived that. But I partially chose that just thinking that, that'd be a good degree to have if I'm going to go be in submarines, right? So second class year, I got a submarine cruise on the USS Narwhal, which was a one-off. So it was a sturgeon class that was built with a unique powertrain in it. It had a reactor, but it didn't have any reduction gears. It just had one giant turbine. And I think they might have only built one of them. It was at the pier a lot. We did get underway, I think, for 5 days, 6 days, something like that. It's getting ready to go on its last deployment, and then it was getting decommissioned. So that was kind of my first, fast attack moment there. Fast forward to first class cruise before my senior year, and I got another submarine cruise on the USS West Virginia. So this time I got a missile boat, a boomer. Lots of room on there, but what I learned on there is that they essentially expect the JOs to flawlessly run a nuclear reactor on 4 hours of sleep a night, which I knew wasn't going to sit well with me. And the other very interesting thing that I found out at the time was that the skipper of that boat controls your dolphins. He controls your warfare qualification. So he bestows that. So if he feels that you don't know your stuff, or quite frankly, if he just doesn't like you, your career has serious ramifications. So I came back from that and then immediately went into a aviation cruise. This was summer of 99. So flew from Annapolis down to Puerto Rico. Rosie Rose was still open, up in arms about the bombing range down there. All that stuff. So we ended up staying 2 or 3 extra days in Puerto Rico. We were supposed to fly out to JFK. JFK was the reserve aircraft carrier at the time. So conventionally powered, and it didn't get a lot of funding. So it had been dead in the water for like 2 or 3 days. And that's why we couldn't caught out, because they couldn't make any wind over the deck. So they finally got, I guess, one screw going on it. And so we caught out there, and I'm there with like 8 other midshipmen. And we're going to draw straws to then determine what order we're going to choose the squadron that we're going to go run with for the next month. And there was like 8 of us. I think I drew the, 3rd or 4th straw, something like that. And this is back, there was Tomcats, there was Hornets, there was S3s. It was your standard 80s, 90s air wing. And the first guy goes, and he picks a Hornet squadron. And I thought to myself, what are you doing, dude? There's only one seat in that thing. And so the next guy picks Tomcats. And when it gets to me, the Prowler Squadron was still available. And so I picked the Prowler Squadron, VAQ 137, the Rooks. And myself and another midshipman got assigned to the Rooks. 2 days later, we pulled into St. Martin, my first port call, an experience, to say the least. We'll just keep the stories out of that. But I came out of that cruise just completely solidified in my choice of Naval Flight Officer. There's a lot of people at the Academy that didn't want to go aviation because it was a longer service commitment. It's 5 years of the Academy. Baseline, 6 years after wings for NFO. I think at the time it was 7 years for pilot and 8 years for jets. And so there was a lot of folks that when you're 22 years old, it's hard to imagine 10 years. That's like half your life that you're then going to, on top of the 4 years of the Academy, right? So a lot of folks were not interested in going aviation specifically for that, but I came away from it thinking to myself, wow, these guys get paid extra to do this for longer? Yes, please. So I put in my preference for Naval Flight Officer. There are several Aviator 05, 06 types at the Academy that will then individually interview you. And this all leads up to the official entry of your preference into the computer system at the Academy, which in 1999, 2000 was pretty basic. And I'm not sure how they do it now, but we put our preferences in. We then left for Christmas. You come back off Christmas, there's some final matriculation, whatever they're doing, calculation, and then you're supposed to go in and verify. So I went in to verify, and Naval Flight Officer was not in there. And so I became very concerned, and I called down to the Leadership and Law Department, and I said, why is Naval Flight Officer not in there? I've got submarines and surface warfare. And they said, oh, yeah, well, you're going to need to go out to Hospital Point and talk to the flight doc. Had no idea what that meant. But I said, okay, thanks. Put on my coat and started walking to Hospital Point. I get out to Hospital Point. I find the flight doc's office, and he's got a row of chairs set up out in the hallway. And there's like 8 or 9 folks sitting in these chairs. And so I plop down in the end chair, and I realize that he's just delivering the bad news one by one. People go in and they come out, real hangdog and everything else. So I go in there, and he tells me that I have a mitral valve prolapse in my heart. So he's like, yeah, well, you got this valve in your heart, and it's like these 2 halves that come together, and it just means that one of those halves is slightly out of alignment from the other one. And I said, okay. And he's like, don't worry, you're not going to die or anything, but it's disqualifying for new accessions into aviation. And then he just kind of casually says, yeah, if you were already in, we'd just give you a waiver for it. So this whole thing comes crashing down, and I said, okay, great, thanks. And I think they must have actually given me my medical record. There were different rules back then. And so I had this thing, or I got a copy of it or something. Anyway, I took it back to my room, and my mom is a registered nurse. And so I'm talking to my mom about this and, everything that's going on. And I start to look at it. And the reason that this came up anyway was because I weren't sure. I might have had a heart murmur when I was a baby or something, right? And so I disclosed this, so I had to go get an echocardiogram done at Bethesda, and this is 9 months ago I'd gone and done that. And so I get to looking at the test, and then I look at like the cardiologist or whoever interpreted this thing, and the dates between the test and the interpretation were 6 weeks apart. And I knew enough to know that that was weird. And luckily enough, Andy Hurwitz, a classmate of mine, his dad is a cardiologist at Cedars-Sinai in UCLA. So he's like, oh, you should talk to my dad. So I call Mr. Hurwitz, Dr. Hurwitz, and I'm talking to him on the phone, and he's like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. You need a second opinion. I said, okay. So I call the flight doc back up, and I say, hey, if I go out in town and get another one of these done, first I said, hey, can I have another one of these done? And he's like, no, my rule is law. And so I said, well, what if I go out in town and get it done? He's like, well, you can, but you'll just be wasting your money because this is, how it is. My company officer at the time, Lieutenant Kronchik, was an E2 NFO, and I told her what was going on. And so she's like, yeah, go do that. So I set it up at Anne Arundel County Hospital or whatever it was. I go out there one morning, and I go get the echocardiogram done, and the tech that's doing it explained to him what the situation is. And he's like, hey, man, so I'm not a cardiologist, but I do these all day long. You don't have a mitral valve prolapse. So I said, okay, great. And I got the official interpretation. I took it back over to the flight doc. Hand it to him. He looks at me. He goes, oh, okay. Clickety-clack on the keyboard, and suddenly Naval Flight Officer is now available to me again. So why is this story important? I have retold it a couple times to junior officers along the way because sometimes you shouldn't accept the first no. And so it's just illustrative of, people make mistakes, and especially in a large bureaucratic organization. To this day, what I think happened was that somebody's results got mixed up with mine. This was back before they had a lot of the interlocks and stuff in hospitals that absolutely ensured that hey, now you go in there and you have to tell them your name and date of birth 4 times. And back then it was not like that. Honestly, I think that's what happened. But that's another moment, right? Where if I hadn't pushed back a little bit, I'd probably be sitting in a reactor compartment right now or something.
No one cares more about you and your career than you do. So
absolutely.
Good on you for taking like you said, it might have gone a different way. Okay, so now you're part of Naval Aviation. You're down here in Pensacola. First flight, I'm guessing, in a T-34 Charlie at VT4, VT10. Where'd you end up going there?
I was assigned to VT4, which was also lucky. However, my first flight in a naval aircraft was actually on board that cruise on the JFK in a Prowler with VAQ-137. I think it was an ECMO 3 in the back seat, so the back left seat. They suited me up, took me up on the flight deck, kept me from running into something or getting blown overboard, and loaded me up in the back seat, and we got to the catapult and went and flew. I really have no idea what we went and did that day, but I came back, and that was my first trap. I guess the COD was my first trap, but the first one facing forward. Then they gave me the holdback fitting from the Prowler because it stayed in the nose gear back then because it was they're all reusable now, but back then it was an actual dumbbell-shaped piece of metal that parted, and the one half of it stayed in the back of the nose gear. The ground crew handed it to me as soon as I climbed down. It's sitting over on the shelf right over there.
You talked about VT4, VT10, the differences there. You said you were lucky to go to VT4. For those that are familiar now, and your wing, the wing that you're Commodore of, everyone's going to go in VT10 and then down select to either VT4 or VT-86. Back in the day, 4 and 10 were kind of a mirror image of one another for primary. So why was it lucky that you went to 4?
Yeah, so back then, we made a lot more naval flight officers because we had a lot more naval flight officers out in the fleet. We had S3 still in the fleet. Tomcat was still out there. Of course, Prowlers were still there. And now, 20-some-odd years later, we're manning aircraft that have many fewer naval flight officers to them. So back then, 4 and 10 were both primary squadrons due to just the production load that was on the wing back then. And there was a commonly held belief amongst the students that VT-10 was the quote-unquote hard or difficult squadron. I'm not sure where it came from, but it was the gospel that you did not want to go to VT-10. So I got sent to VT-4, dumb luck, whatever you want to call it, and we didn't even look towards that end of the hallway when we were over in 4. It was like we were going to somehow invoke the wrath if we looked down onto the green tile at the other end of the hallway. So yeah, I was lucky in that sense.
What did you think of the T-34?
So the T-34 was an interesting aircraft. You remember the first time you smelled burnt JP5, right? It's its own unique smell. It does not smell like burnt kerosene. It smells, and it just permeates everything. So the inside of the aircraft is just, it always smells like burnt jet fuel, burnt JP5, right? And so that's one of the things I remember about the T-34 was the smell. The other great things about the T-34 was that the canopy slid back, and it had an ashtray in it. And so it was sort of this, when I was going through flight school, there was this, I guess it was a transitory moment between like the modern Navy that we have now and the Navy that was before. So it was T-34s, T-39s, and T-2s back then, all aging aircraft designed in the 50s, if not, before that even. And, I still remember the last step of the bailout procedure from the T-34, which was crouch dive pull to actually physically pull the ripcord on your parachute. And so that was eye-opening to the mortality of the entire thing. I remember sitting down the hallway there in the perch as a student when we checked into the wing, and I don't remember who checked us in. I guess it was the Commodore, but whoever it was said to us, look to your left and look to your right. If you do a 20-year career in naval aviation, one of you will not survive. We lost 2 T-34s. I started in, I got to VT-4 in January of 2001, and I winged in January of 2002 out of VT-86. So in the 1 year that I was actually flight side, 2 T-34s were lost. One of them was an instructor proficiency flight, so 2 instructors passed away. So it was reinforced while we were here too. But the good old turbo mentor. Back then, we flew the first 8 flights. So we as naval flight officers flew in the front seat, flew the plane, which you might think to yourself is a little backwards. But much like everything else in the Navy, it's, you know how to swim? Cool. Why don't you go ahead and jump in the deep end of that pool there? And that's exactly what happened. So I was assigned my on wing. He was a COD guy. Should have been real cool. He was not. To this day, I don't know what he was so angry about all the time, but he was an angry beaver.
Did his style influence your style later as an instructor?
Absolutely.
How so?
So my very first T-34 flight, go out to the plane, we get through the pre-flight, all that stuff, we climb in. I managed to get the thing started. I think it had like a 12 or 13 step start sequence that had to be done on a time schedule lest you burn the engine up. I managed to get the thing started and, was really patting myself on the back for that. And go to get the clearance. Of course, I have to ask for it like 3 times, and then he finally cuts me off and says, we got the clearance. He taxis it to the runway. We get cleared for takeoff. We get put on the runway, and he goes, okay, take off. And I think I must have said, huh? And ambiently from the back seat, he screamed, F word, take off. Right. Jesus. And I think, people have, I guess, a couple of reactions to this. 1, you can completely fold up and go inside yourself. 2, you can disregard it and keep doing what you're doing. My reaction was to become very angry. And so I was like, cool, well, I have no idea what I'm doing here, so I guess we're both going to die today. And so I was like, all right, what do we need to do to take off? Oh, yeah, I think, hold the brakes and this lever over here, I'll go ahead and put that all the way up forward. Okay, great. Yep, yeah, I don't know. Sure, looks good. Let's do this. And, let off the brakes. We start rolling. I'm sure he applied some rudder inputs to keep us on the runway. Stick got light, acted like it wanted to fly. Okay, great. Pull back on the stick, up we go. Start making the turnout for it. And he said, okay, I got the controls. And I don't think I replied quite. He's like, I got it. Okay, great, fine. Gave it back to him. But that was the beginning of the story there with my on-wing. And the crazy part, I think I did the first 3 flights with him. My 4th flight was with a different instructor, and we went over to Mobile to do pattern work. And this guy was super chill. Go over there, we're doing pattern work. I'm flying the pattern, bouncing, going around. He's like, how many hours do you have? And I go, I think almost 5, sir. And he's like, oh? He's like, you don't have your... no, I do not, sir. He's like, oh, well, you're doing really well here. And I just thought to myself, yeah, well, it's amazing what happens when you have an instructor that, is actually trying to teach you something and providing, okay, that looked good. Next time, try something else. Do a little more of this, a little less of that, whatever. And it made an impact on me. I still remember to this day, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if you're really trying to teach somebody, you got to meet them where they are. And that guy did not.
I'm glad it wasn't the end, because I'm sure for some folks, right, they might not have handled that super well. Obviously, you went on to do very well. You ended up selecting jets. You mentioned some of those airplanes that you went on to fly, so the T-39, the T-2, VT-86. What was that like, that first, I say first jet, like we talked about the first ride, but now as a student, you're an active part of the crew. You're actually, good Lord, you're learning a lot. You're behind an F-16 radar in the T-39. What was it like going to 86? Was that hopefully a better experience, I'm guessing?
Yeah, so we actually did T-39 in intermediate then as well.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So primary, I think, was all T-34, and then intermediate, I think, was T-39. We also went through with Marines and Air Force guys and Italians and Germans. So it was a very varied group. That was back when we did the joint training. And so we had Air Force instructors as well. The command of the squadron rotated around between a Marine and an Air Force guy and naval officer. But T-39s were a lot of fun. We had contract pilots for them. The contract pilots, to a person, were salty TAC air guys from Vietnam. And it was like flying with your grandpa every day with, the complete range of personalities. And some of them were just old curmudgeons, and other ones were, all right, sport, let's get you up here and figure this out. There was one pilot, and I'm completely blanking on his name, but he always flew with a toothpick in his mouth. And if he thought that you were marginally competent and that he kind of liked you, if you were ever on a route and you got lost, he would point the toothpick in the direction of the turn point. And so if you got the toothpick instructor, you were like, all right, okay, now I have to, make friends and influence people here in a short amount of time.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's one thing that I don't think people realize. When I think of flight training, they think of, the green suits, the active duty folks. But how freaking cool to learn from someone, I say, of that generation, with great respect, right? But, man, oh man. Same with our instructors that we have here in the Sim Bay and that do our academics and get all our students ready for coming flight side. Just incredible folks. Where else do you get to be surrounded by, in many cases, legends of naval aviation?
Absolutely. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but coming into this job, here being the Commodore of the training wing, what you really come to realize is that those folks that are the contract instructors, all they did was hang up their flight suit for a polo shirt, and they're doing the same job that they did. And why do they do that? Because they want to serve, and they want to continue to give back to the country and continue to produce the next generation of aviators. And it's pretty humbling. So a lot of those folks over there could have been retired a long time ago, and they choose not to be because it's important to them.
We already talked about a little bit of the future here. You're going to go to the Prowler, going to be an ECMO, kind of like that very first touch down there in Puerto Rico. But before we get there, you kind of mentioned some dates and times, and I think it's really critical. I think we all remember where we were on 9/11. You were here in flight training, and you were finishing up your time in 86. What was that day like, and was it a distinct memory, I'm guessing?
Absolutely. Obviously, 9/11. I was in VT-86. I was in strike sims. So we had simulators here that were just radar sims. And I was scheduled for that morning. I had come in, I was sitting in the student ready room in the simulator building, and the first aircraft had already gone into a tower. There was a very old cathode ray tube TV sitting on top of this bookcase or something in there. And I can't remember if I actually went to go do the sim or not, but we had an all students call, came back over the hangar, VT-86 OPSO comes out, says, hey, this is the situation. And he said something that was very prescient, which was, now listen, you're going to think you're not going to get in on this. Because at the time, it was retaliatory strikes, like Desert Fox and, like these one-offs, kind of like we're seeing in Yemen. He said, this is going to go on for a lot of years. And I think about that now. I spent most of my career fight in that war. Just extremely prescient of him at the time. So what it did as students, though, was it really steeled our resolve to, hey, this is real. This is going to be something. And it was. A month later, launching strikes into Afghanistan, all that stuff. It was a very patriotic moment for the country. And, well before the internet existed, but it's not like it is today. Just the way, everything was in that moment. I look back on it, and the entire country solidified.
I distinctly remember a little town of Tullahoma, where I'm from. There were American flags were sold out the next day. It was kind of a strange thing. I remember it took literally weeks for them to get more back in stock, and then it changed the world. I remember the skies being quiet. COVID is the most recent example of that. Of literally just not hearing any airplanes. You don't realize how tuned up we are to that. You just hear them all the time, and then it was total silence. But wow, what a way to end your training here. Get those wings of gold in the museum atrium, I'm guessing.
Yep. Right, just like we do every month. That's come full circle now.
Is it a weird feeling that first time that you were the one not having those? You didn't win them yourself. You were handing those to folks that had earned them themselves. Was it kind of a weird feeling being on the other side of the looking glass, maybe?
Absolutely. It was. I just had this extreme sense of, like I said, everything coming full circle. For those that haven't been in the atrium in the museum, we call it the Cathedral of Naval Aviation because that's really kind of what it feels like when you're in there. It was very memorable to do that, to do my first winging there. Yeah, some things don't change.
It's a humbling place, for sure. There's a lot of history in that place, and I'm glad we have it. Glad Naval Aviation has it to share. And now with the base being open to the public, people can come in and enjoy it themselves. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is the softball, one of many. What's the Prowler? What's an ECMO? And what piece of the wing does the Prowler, RIP to the airplane, no longer in service, right?
Girl.
Yeah, indeed. But the ECMO and now the Growler, we're going to get to talk about both. But what piece in that does the airplane play?
So the Grumman EA-6B Prowler, the family truckster, whatever they want to call it, the monikers that they give it. But
I've heard the Scooby-Doo bus of death.
Yeah, like the flying turkey leg. There's a bunch of them. The tadpole. When you look at the aircraft, it looks like it should be flying in the other direction. Very bulbous nose, front end. It is a stretch version of the A6 intruder. A6 shaped the way it is to get the gigantic air-to-ground radar in the front. So Grumman Aircraft came up with a stretch version of it to jam enemy radars. In 1972, it came online with VAQ-132, the Scorpions, which I was later lucky enough to command, but very basic in its initial sense. So it had a crew of 4, a pilot, and 3 ECMOs, or electronics countermeasures officers, and their job initially was to jam early warning radars. So the large, long-range, lower-frequency early warning radars that could see the airstrike coming. So that's initially what they jammed in Vietnam, and then it moved on from there. So evolved new pods, a couple of different upgrades throughout the years. ADCAP, ICAP, ICAP 2, finally ICAP 3 was the final iteration of it there at the end. When it went to digital receivers and all that good stuff. But it always had a crew of 4. And there were, I guess, 2 jobs as an NFO in that aircraft. In the back seat, the 2 seats were identical, just left and right next to each other, ECMO 2 and 3. You were both doing the same job, but that was where the jammers were managed, and later the HARM. So the high-speed anti-radiation missile that came on, I think it was in the 90s was when it was finally cleared to carry that. But we carried that too. The initial part of targeting a HARM happened in the back seat, and then you would pass it to the front seat, because that's where the HARM control panel was for ECMO 1, which was the front right seat, which was essentially just as a co-pilot. No flight controls, but you had the radar hood in front of you for the APS 130 radar, and you had the CDNU, which was your navigation input device. The CDI was the initial one. We used to call it the light bright because it was very hard plastic, like the old school calculator digital display, right? But it was like 2 inches tall, so we call it the light bright. Yeah, so when you flew up front, you were a co-pilot and a navigator, and when you flew in the back, you were essentially, you could be a mission commander from the front seat, but it was easier to do it from the back because you could make sure that the jamming assignments were being done correctly. Anything that was happening in the back, you could not see in the front until ICAP 3. So you kind of made these choices as you became more senior and became a mission commander about where you wanted to fly in the aircraft. But if I was going to be the mission commander, I'd be in the back so that I could make sure that our effect, which was that non-kinetic effect, the jamming was actually leaving the aircraft like it was supposed to. So yeah, you kind of had to learn 2 different jobs. There were 2 different NATOPS checks. There was a front seat and a back seat NATOPS check, which was, I think, to this day unique amongst naval aircraft. But, I didn't know any better at the time, but, talking to my buddies who went to fly different things, I was like, oh, you only have one NATOPS check? You know, it's like that meme that's like, oh, you get paid for this? Yeah, so you had to study for two different things. The backseat NATOPS check was like a complete run through of every sub menu that was available. What's this button do? What's this button do? What's this button do? You had to know it all. You had a little data entry keypad in front of you on this little pedestal. And so you could use your fingers, but everybody just used their thumbs. So we just, we called it thumbs of fury in the back seat there. The master rad switch was back there. That was essentially the pickle for our ordnance, right? Which was the effect of energy letting it out of the pods. I think I had almost 900 hours in the Prowler, something like that. I was 900. By the time I got in her, she was getting a little old. So I get up to Whidbey, Whidbey Island after, we winged here. We had to go to the centrifuge at Holloman Air Force Base because the Navy one was broken for many years. So we go to the Air Force Base. We go through the centrifuge. I had a buddy that went momentarily blind in the centrifuge. We had to pick him up and get him out of there. Couldn't see anymore. And then 20 minutes later, his sight came back. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Went to SEER school in San Diego. To this day, the coldest I've ever been in my life. People think San Diego's warm. Well, it's not in March, especially in the mountains. I'll just leave it at that. Back before kinder, gentler SEER school. So anyway, get up to Whidbey. One of my roommates had grown up in Everett, so he was happy to be home. I was disappointed to have been stationed back in the sticks. So I grew up in the sticks. I had no desire to go back to the sticks. And here I found myself in a town of 20,000 people on an island in Northwest Washington.
And the weather is great, I'm told. Absolutely beautiful.
Oh, let me tell you, if you were a vampire, that's exactly where you'd want to live. I don't think it's a coincidence that Forks, Washington, where the vampire movies are set, is up there. But we got to Whidbey. Back then, we also had to do 10 weeks of electronic warfare school before we started the RAG. So us and the EP3 guys would go to this. The pilots did 5 weeks. The NFOs did the full 10 weeks. Our extra 5 weeks consisted of, we called it memorizing the phone book. So it was a bunch of radar parametrics that you had to memorize. And then you would listen to beeps and squeaks, which is the audio that a radar makes when it transmits, and we had to measure and time and come up with the pulse width and all this stuff, and then try to identify the radar based off this.
I don't have any tones to play, but if I played them, do you think you still have that deep?
I could probably identify the scan types.
That's incredible.
But that's
Yeah, but when you start with that, when that's the foundational level of knowledge you have to have, I'm guessing it sticks.
It does, especially when you're in your 20s. So today in my 40s, probably not so much, but certainly in my 20s. So we get to VAQ 129, the Vikings, the FRS for the Prowler, and we get through that, and I get sent to VAQ 135, world famous Black Ravens, which were on deployment in the summer of 2003, spring summer of 2003. So I fly out there and I caught on board, and I walked into the ready room. At least I knew what a ready room was because I'd done my midshipman cruise before. I'm the F&G, the new guy, and I'm standing there next to the duty desk in civvies because you caught out in civvies. And this pilot walks in, and he is soaked through. Like, it looks like somebody threw him overboard. And this was one of the department heads, and he was like, "Welcome." And I was like, wow, it must be hot out there. Well, it was hot because the environmental control system in the jet he'd just gotten out had gone full hot and stuck there. So while it was hot in the Persian Gulf, which is where I met him on cruise, because that was 2 months after the invasion of Iraq, he was exceptionally hot that day, and that was kind of my fleet introduction to the Prowler. The very next day, we put one in the water due to it had J-52 engines, and that engine was originally developed for the AGM. I think it's the 158. You have to correct me on the designation, but it's the Hound Dog missile, which was developed in the 50s. So the Hound Dog cruise missile, J-58 engine, one-time use. Then they decided, it'd be great is if we put this in an A4 and the A-6. And so we had a slightly up-tuned version of it, had two of them in the Prowler. And so turbojet, not turbofan, non-afterburning.
Loud, incredibly loud.
Incredibly loud. The exhaust pipes on the Prowler kind of faced downwards a little bit, which I think added to the flavor there, but exceptionally loud. And they had a main bearing issue. So it was a known deficiency. The civilian version of the engine, they corrected it, for civilian use, but they never did on the military side. So the fix was to just take oil samples early and often, and do these freedom of rotation checks to okay, yeah, feels good. Well, some of that stuff turns out hadn't happened. And 7 miles from the ship in full view of everybody on the flight deck. I think it was the right engine came apart and put blades through the left engine and, of course, cut all the hydraulic lines. And they were 8,000 feet when this happened. And there you go. We're giving it back. So they give it back to the taxpayers over there in the Persian Gulf, and everybody gets out, and that all ends well. But I get to the squadron. That happens the second day I'm there after the ECS full hot the day I got there. And so then we don't fly for a while because of this. And a lot of people got fired because it turns out it was, maintenance malpractice. So as a wide-eyed Lieutenant JG, this is my introduction to the fleet. I'm not flying. Apparently aircraft blow up, and a lot of people are losing their jobs. And I'm just the new guy. So, yeah, we had 2 all-officers meetings a day for about 6 weeks as the skipper was trying to keep his job and all that stuff. And so we started flying again. Just wasn't a good place to be. So I did 4.5 months of that cruise. We got back from that and lost all of our aircraft because there was a outer wing panel red stripe message. So we had to give up all of our aircraft to give them to another squadron so they could go on cruise. And, these are all the things that happen in a dying platform, as well. They've identified the relief, and they're not going to invest much money in the incumbent. So yeah, that was my introduction to the fleet. It was not the introduction I'd been hoping for.
Totally fair. And it's easy to understand, but it's hard to communicate if it's not something you've been a part of. When you understand, the parts, the money, the emphasis is going other places and maybe not where you are. And it hurts, honestly. But you mentioned Iraq, and I'm guessing, was there some green ink in some of those flights, actual combat missions?
I think I got 1 or 2 on that cruise. It wasn't until my 05 cruise that we really got into it, between losing the aircraft. And then I actually fell out of NATOP squall.
Really?
Yeah.
So that little flying.
Yeah, there was so little flying. I fell out of NATOP squall, and I remember this because it was we got back in November, and then palm leave and Christmas and whatever, and I was redoing my NATOP squall back in Whidbey in January. It hadn't even been a year because I just got my NATOP check of the RAG, and I was like, wow, this is not the line of work I was hoping for.
Fast forwarding to 05, you mentioned flying the airplane in combat. Again, I think we understand in big, broad terms electronic warfare, but at that point, the Iraqi military has been defeated, right? Americans are on the ground. There's a different threat, and it's kind of one of the pivots of what the Prowler was designed to do. Originally, we talked about that heritage post-Vietnam, going after, SAMs, but there's other parts of the electronic warfare, triad, that battle space that the airplane can absolutely contribute to. So I was hoping maybe you could kind of talk to that and what the mission set was.
Yeah, absolutely. So went through the rest of 2004. It was the turnaround cycle for the squadron. And so I guess the good thing that came out of being so low as a squadron was that we then started getting selectively detailed, just some superstars. And so my experience in the 05 cruise was night and day difference from the 03 cruise. For those that don't also know, your time in your JO squadron is about 3 years. So I'm now turned around, we go to the 05 cruise. I'm the only JO that's got cruise experience because they essentially did an oil change on the ready room. So now I'm senior JOPA, as they call it. I've now got my mission commander qual. So, that's another big step up in your career when you essentially get handed the keys to the jet and the responsibility going out there with your JO buddies and not horking it up. So, yeah, we went back in 05, still on Nimitz, still CAG 11, and the battlefield had changed. Rise of the insurgency, and of course they were going to do whatever asymmetric things they could do to strike back at us. So things entered people's vocabularies like IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and EFPs, explosively formed penetrators. The enemy was not dumb, and so they used what they had. And very, very well. So the great thing about the LQ-99 jamming system, the pods themselves, is that they can be made to do a lot of things, and they cover a very wide frequency range. And so the 2005 deployment was primarily protecting convoys, whether they be active patrols or supply convoys moving on main supply routes from base to base. We would get fragged to go do that. And so that's what we did. We launched off the carrier, went into Iraq, and we would do 2 or 3 vol periods on a mission, depending on what the boat needed us back for a deck time or whatever. We didn't do this, but later squadrons would actually fly the jets off and base them out of Al-Assad, Iraq, which I was later based at later in my career. And they did that so that they could service more JTARs and more requests for this stuff. And that was really kind of the correct answer to it because it allowed us to provide a lot more support to that. And I have a pretty vivid memory one day of an EOD team that definitely a confirmed IED on the route. They'd found it, the OD team was coming out to disarm it, and just the sound in the guy's voice when he thought we were going to leave, like before they got done doing it, really kind of told me how much they valued our presence there and the electronic blanket shield that we provided. So that really drove it home. It's funny, the students these days, when they make it over to 86, and if they're not certain whether they want to select Growlers or they want to select, Super Hornets, Strike Fighter, I will ask them, do you want to save people's lives or do you want to take people's lives? Because if you go VFA, you're taking people's lives. And if you go Growler, you're saving people's lives. You're making sure that folks come home to their kids, whether it's another Naval Aviator flying in another aircraft or it's somebody on the ground. That's what you're doing. Because I tell them, you got to choose the mission, not the platform. Platforms come and go, but the mission remains. So yeah, that was my first real introduction to that, and that really kind of drove it home for me that this is what we do here. This is what we do in VAQ and electronic attack.
I mentioned it earlier. For me, again, the defining thing is going to be the weather, going to be emergencies, because in the 53, I didn't have a chance to fly it in that minesweeping environment. Delivering cargo to ships, that was awesome as well. But any good memories of the weather, any good memories of EPs that the airplane threw at you as a crew? And the reason I mention it, I think CRM, a lot of people throw around crew resource management. Yeah, it's important. Wonderful. It actually matters in an airplane as technically complex as the Prowler. You can't, one person cannot, two people cannot do it alone. You need the whole crew. So maybe good memories or bad memories from that time?
So I'll share a CRM story here. So second cruise, going into in-country one day, department head pilot, who's now a SES out on the East Coast. Great guy, Ed Growy, Big Ed Growy from Whidbey Island. We had a new Lieutenant JG in ECMO 1, and then myself and another lieutenant in the back seat. So we're flying. The Prowler had liquid oxygen bottles, and so you were kind of limited to how long you could stay on station just based on how much LOX you had. So there was 3 bottles back there, and I forget how many liters and whatever, but if you were going to be fairly high, which we were, we'd usually go, low 20s to do this mission and do our orbits and stuff. And that day, you were going to be on oxygen. And so if you got 4 people breathing oxygen, there's a chance you might run out. So Begway, the pilot, is the mission commander because he's the senior guy in the aircraft. But I think we did 3 vols that day. We got extended for some reason. And so I'm trying to coordinate with the boat to land at the next cycle or whatever. And so we get extra gas, we're coming home, and we had made this decision because we were almost out of LOX, and you need to land at the boat with your mask on. So Begway says, hey, everybody, come off oxygen. So we did, and we're flying back, and we're in the 20s. Obviously, the cabin pressure but it's above 8,000. I think it had to be above 10,000. And Begway starts getting hypoxic, and I could tell because I'd flown with him enough. And I'm in the back seat. I'm spatially separated from him by like 10 feet. I'm in a separate cockpit. And I start talking to him on the ICS, and he's giving me like gibberish answers back. And I told Oslo, Charlotte, Outer Space Liaison Officer, that's Oslo, I said, you need to put his mask on him and turn his LOX on. So ECMO 1 could reach the lock switch for the pilot. So that was the beauty of flying side by side next to each other. Another beauty was hand signals. You could nod at each other. There was a lot of nonverbal things that would happen in the front cockpit. And she was like, I got to do what? And I said, Charlotte, get his mask on him right now and get that lock switch on, which she did. And a minute and a half later, he was back to normal. But hey, CRM, right? So like somebody recognizing the situation to start with, communication, all the stuff, get that back on there. And yeah. Weather in the Gulf, probably not so much. There was one really scary night landing. Pilot got fatigued. I was in the back seat of this one. So in the back, you can't see anything out the front. It's like being in a closet with a side window. So landing at the boat in the back, you would lock your harness. You had instruments in the back, so you could tell your altitude and how, attack and repeater and stuff and how far you were from the boat. So you do this internal GCA. Okay, cool. I'm at 2 miles and 800 feet and everything's going like it should be, by and large. And then you could kind of tell we were getting close, and then there'd be a flurry of things going by in the windows, as even at night, because they got the sodium lights up there, but there'd be a flurry of, aircraft and cranes and the island and whatever going past. And then you should feel the plane hitting the deck. You should feel a big tug, and that should be it. Or if you don't feel the big tug, you should immediately, as soon as you hit the deck, man, especially in the Prowler with the turbo jets, which have no spool time, it's immediate. You should immediately be feeling power back on the aircraft. So we come down the chute that night, and we hit the deck, and there's no spool. I was sitting in ECMO 3 and sitting next to Bubba Fimler, who was also from Missouri, Show Me Coalition in the back seat. We go off the angle, like we trundle off the angle, still without being throttled up. Somewhere in all this, I have a memory of seeing the deck edge go past. out the right side of the aircraft, like in my peripheral.
Above you.
Yeah. So I normally would come down the chute kind of already braced. I'd have my left hand be on my right wrist. I would just put my fingers on the handle. So the Prowler also had upper and lower handles. I don't know why anybody would ever use the upper handle in it, but because you went through the canopy. So you had we get to the call sign story. I'll tell you about that. But
okay, sounds good.
Anyway, so we go trundling off the deck. I see the deck edge go past, and I went from hand on the handle to hand in the handle, gripped, and I was tensing my shoulders to pull when I felt the G come back on the plane, and we flew it out. And I looked over at Bubba, and he looked over at me. Neither one of us said a word, and he reached over and like slapped my leg. So there's only been a couple times when I thought I was going to die, and that was one of them.
And the other thing to think about, I'm guessing there's a command ejection. Is it one handle pulls and everyone goes, or is it?
Yeah, but that was ECMO 1.
ECMO 1. Okay, so if you'd pulled, only you go.
Yes, only I would have gone.
The reason I mentioned that is even so, you're talking about 4 ejection seats in a big old airplane.
Right.
Even under those ideal conditions, it takes a second to get everyone out of the airplane safely.
Yeah, so it was 1.2 seconds. So ECMO 3 went first.
So back left. Okay,
back left went first.
Okay.
With no retraction. So whatever position your upper body was in was how you were leaving the plane through the canopy. And then it was 0.4 seconds. Rocket ripple, 3, 2, 1, pilot. The other thing that it did was it shot you out in this fleur-de-lis so that you wouldn't hit each other. The ejection seat rails were slightly canted out, which for Bubba, if he'd pulled the handle, he'd have got shot into the side of the ship. Whether you sit in 2 or 3 in the back seat is, in fact, I rode 2 most of the time because there was more leg room, and I'm over 6 feet tall. So for me on those long flights, I'd usually ride ECMO 2 so I could stretch my legs out. For whatever reason that day, I was in ECMO 3. But yeah. So not so much weather there, but let me tell you, that aircraft, we used to joke that I didn't need to do a NATOPS check because I did them about 2 or 3 times a month, just flying it from actual emergencies that would happen. Another night I went out and I took 3 field traps that night, 3 different airplanes. We had 4 airplanes in the squadron. We were getting ready to go on deployment. One of the pilots needed to do field passes. And this goes back to the being a JO and being handed the keys. So I actually was not a mission commander quite yet, but the skipper at the time felt that I was good enough to take another JO pilot. The Prowler also had about 150 circuit breakers in the back seat, so somebody always had to be in the back seat in order to pull circuit breakers, reset circuit breakers, et cetera, et cetera. Grumman, that's how they built things, as you could see in Top Gun 2. So particularly enjoyed that. I got a good chuckle out of that.
I did as well. That was a detail that was it needed to be in there.
Right. Yeah. It was like the technical advisor did real well there. But yeah, we go out there just to do instrument passes at the field. It was a Sunday, and it was local area, and that's why he was like, yeah, Craig could take him up there and get his 5 passes or whatever he needs. Okay. So off we went. The first one, I think, was some sort of hydraulics failure. Went out, got it configured, dumped the fuel, came back in, took a trap. Ground crew comes out, tows us out of the trap. We get into the next plane. Go back out the next time. This one, the horizontal stab failed to shift to clean throws. So the horizontal stab had these extended throws that when you had the gear and flaps down at slow speeds, it would give you, okay, it was very dangerous, though, at higher speeds, because you could depart the aircraft or it could like rip the tail off. So this was one of those you really had to watch what you're doing. So we got that put together, came in, took another trap, got in the third jet. Third one, we go out, something happened. We ended up in a no flap, no slat at night. So this is a very high approach speed, and I don't remember the baseline airspeed. I think it was like 169 knots or something. We dumped down to the bare minimum gas. And so the worry here was that you would overspeed the nose gear and blow it up and leave the runway and all this stuff. So the skipper, Cricket, take him out there. I'll be in my office. He was doing paperwork in the office when all this happened, right? And so he gets on the base radio and says, I want you to take the long field gear, because he was worried about the pilot 2-blocking the short field gear, like coming in too hot, completely just ripping it out of the ground and stuff, right? So we come around, we touch down. Somewhere in all this, the landing light didn't get turned on, the taxi light. So we touch down, and we are just hauling down the runway. And I'm like, can we turn the light on, please? So he gets that flipped on, and then, everything's illuminated. We take the long field gear. And the best part was, 4 aircraft in a Prowler squadron, usually only had 1 or 2 of them up. We happened to have all 4 of them up because we were getting to do a fly-off. I thought at this point, back to CRM, I thought, okay, maybe we're probably done. Nope, getting the 4th airplane. So the 4th one worked. Went out and got his 5 passes or whatever and went and shut it down. But yeah, you really had to know that aircraft. It did not give you MSP codes like the Super Hornet does. There were several compound emergencies. Flying the Prowler, there was all this like tribal knowledge and gouge that was not in the NATOPS. So it had probably previously been in the NATOPS and they'd taken it out or whatever. But you had guys that had 3,000 Prowler hours and stuff up there that they knew every little thing. And that was how the RAG was too. It was full of all this trivia. And I always wondered why that was. And later I reflected on it and I realized, so the Prowler was, in the Growlers too, it's extremely, there's a lot of work with the mission planning. The mission plan is extremely intensive. The actual execution in the Prowler was anticlimactic. And so I don't know if it was a psychological thing or what, but that community prided itself on knowing aircraft knowledge and systems knowledge. And so they'd ask you these trivia questions like, at what temperature does the CSD uncouple, which was this constant speed drive off the engine? I don't know. I get a light that says it has happened. What temperature does that happen at? Well, it was the melting temperature of lead, which is 354 degrees, which I still remember. But, there was all these little gotchas they'd get you with at the RAG. And so it was like flying a 57 Chevy. You had to know how to change the tires. And that was another thing. You take the thing on the road, and the toolkit you got to take with you had spare parts in it. I was the redneck car guy. We took a jet once. We were taking it to a refit in Jacksonville. That's where depot maintenance was. It had 2 books full of maths. My ejection seat didn't adjust. That was one of the gripes on it. It was cleared for a one-time 1G flight from Northwest Washington all the way to Jacksonville, Florida. So we landed in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and we get back in and fire lights didn't work. Well, you can't go flying if you don't have fire lights. So we get one of the maintenance senior chiefs on the phone. He's talking to me, take this, do this, take this panel off. Okay, great. Yeah, you see that wire bundle in there? Yep, shake it. Have him try the fire lights while you're shaking it. Hey, I got him. Okay, don't touch it. Put the panel back on. Get in. That was a common thing back then, flying Prowlers. And when we would stop at an Air Force base and we'd be doing this stuff, the Air Force guys would look at us like we were from a different planet. And back then, that was really one of the big differences between Navy and Air Force aviation.
Okay, so for those maybe not familiar with the way that naval aviation and kind of the quals and everything progresses, right? After your first fleet tour, there's a couple different things. You could be an FRS instructor, teach people about the airplane, maybe go back to some of the other orange and white airplanes, but kind of the pinnacle, the place that everyone's supposed to go, or supposed to want to go, maybe is the better way to say it, right? Yep. Is to be we would call it in the helicopter world, the SWITI, Squadron Weapons and Tactics Instructor. So that means you are clearly, the top of the top, right? You're the person that doesn't just understand the airplane, but you understand the tactics behind employing it, and now you're going to go out and not just teach those tactics, not just standardize others, but you're going to develop maybe the next level of tactics as that Prowler continues on the rest of its career in naval aviation. So you were chosen, spoiler alert, you were chosen to be a SWITI and be that bearer of the torch and pass the information on. Again, I know we can't really talk too much about some of the specific details, but what was it like being a SWITI, and what was it like being a SWITI in the Prowler?
So I went to the Prowler Weapons School, which was at Whidbey at the time. We did a lot of integration with the Air Force for it, just in terms of mission planning and then the final graduation exercise in conjunction with the Air Force Weapons School down at Nellis Air Force Base. So my first real introduction to working with the Air Force was at the Weapons School. It was every squadron has a training officer who's a patch, as they call it, and then there are other folks in the squadron, more senior patches that are now, department heads, skipper, XO, whatever. So I went and did that, and in my case, it was in preparation for going to VX9, the Operational Test Squadron at China Lake. So they do tactics development as one of their missions, and so, hey, cool, we need guys with patches, and so that's part of the deal that I went to do there at the weapons school and then on. But working with the Air Force was, the Navy at the time was kind of focused on almost like Vietnam-era alpha strikes, based on the carrier air wing, and so smaller numbers of aircraft, get in, get out, sort of the drive-by shooting. The Air Force comes in mass, 40, 50 plane strikes, multiple axes, and that's something as a Prowler guy. And the thing that I don't think people understand is that the Prowler and now the Growler, we're the only thing in the Department of Defense that does what we do. So the Air Force used to have the EF-111, which used the same jamming pods, except they had them in the bomb bay. Otherwise, same exact system. Grumman built it, put it in that aircraft. And the Air Force made the decision to sundown the EF-111 in the late 90s. And that was based on the rise of stealth. So they had the F-117 and the B-2, and they thought, you know what, maybe we don't need this so much. And so they divested themselves of that and of the mission. And so the agreement sort of was throughout the years was that, hey, the Navy will provide. They've got enough Prowlers and whatever. And out of that, though, started the Air Force Aircrew Exchange Program. So the land-based squadrons at Whidbey, so we have expeditionary squadrons at Whidbey, and we had them back then too. They would have one full crew that was Air Force guys on their second tour. B-52 folks, B-1 folks, occasionally an EC-130 backender would show up there. And those folks would go to the expeditionary. I actually went through the RAG with 2 Air Force folks, one of which used to fly Wild Weasels. He flew F-4Gs in Desert Storm 1. He was a major going through 129 with me. He had a distinguished flying cross and had been over Baghdad, hosing off harm and whatever the first night of Desert Storm. So he had some stories for sure. Kevin Schorb is his name, but yeah, so getting back to weapons school and working with the Air Force, you went from sort of this simplified Navy, hey, we're going to package this thing up and go in and do the thing and get out. And with the Air Force, it's more like, yeah, well, we're just going to hang out for a while, and well, he's got something to do, and this guy over here's got something to do. And it really complicated the planning for us because our planning doesn't start until the bombing and attack plan has been finalized. And so when I talked before about our planning being very intensive, we can't even start planning until we know how they're coming in and leaving. And sometimes it takes a while for them to figure that out. And so there's a lot of hours, a lot of late nights spent before the event or before the strike. The way our tactics are kind of driven by what they choose to do. No, we advise them on what might be a good idea or what might not be a good idea. And sometimes they listen to us, and sometimes they can't for other reasons. But my introduction to joint warfare was during the weapons school and working with the Air Force at Nellis. And it's the best of the Air Force there. And so it was really an elevated state of play.
Do you think that's something that change will ever be made? And much hay has been made recently about some folks thinking, the Air Force might buy Growlers, and maybe they want to return to that mission set because they realize just how important the electromagnetic spectrum, that war in that way. Like you said, yeah, stealth is great and might be great on day one or night one. Got the order a little bit wrong there, but it's a great thing. And then at a certain point, you need those other assets. And I think, what do they say? High demand, low density. There's only so many Growlers. Do you think that's something that'll ever change? Asking you to predict the future here, which is totally not fair.
I don't think so. The Air Force is going B-21. They're going F-35, and we've bought 160 Growlers. So, fun fact, the reason why we have so many Growlers is because the Air Force was supposed to have figured out what they were going to do during the first 10 years of this century. They tossed around making an EB-52 with like a 1 megawatt jammer. Yeah, just some big stuff.
Strike Eagle, I'm told there was a potential kit to put on that, potentially to make that a jammer.
Yeah, and it's funny, I remember the glossy brochure when they were doing the F-35 when I was at the EW school for 10 weeks. They came in and pitched this version of the F-35 that was a two-seater and had like an extended fuselage plug on it, and it was a two-seater so that there could be an EWO in the back to handle all the jamming that they were going to do. But it was always funny to me because I was like, okay, so you're a stealth aircraft that's now emitting large volumes of energy. We're at cross purposes here, right? So it was always paradoxical to me and always made me chuckle, but obviously that didn't happen, so maybe somebody else thought about it. But now we have the Growler, and we have a bunch of them because the Air Force never did get it figured out. And so Admiral Roughhead, who was CNO back in 2010 timeframe, Air Force came back and said, well, hey, the Navy will just take care of it. And this was some 4D chess that the Navy had played and played correctly. They said, okay, well, listen, we only bought enough Growlers for our air wings. So if you would like us to do this, you're going to have to foot the bill. And so that's how we got another 50 Growlers, was based on that. So exped squadrons then became a thing, which happened to be the first time was in 132. We were on the boat and then got switched to exped, which is 2 months of my time into the squadron. But that was all after VX9. So anyway, weapons school happened on the way to VX9.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about VX9 because I think it's the photo you just showed me earlier of you in the back of the jet, incredible shot out over the desert. What's a VX9? What's the mission set, and what did you do specifically there?
So the VX9 Vampires, they are in China Lake, California. So Air Test and Evaluation Squadron 9. China Lake out in the Mojave Desert. It is where the initial scenes of Top Gun 2 were filmed.
Did it look familiar when you saw the movie?
Oh, it absolutely did. It was. I was like, oh, that's okay. I know where that is. That's that building. Yep.
Yeah, one of the hangars I know has a name to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm told there's not a lot of photography and videography there either. I'm impressed they were able to even film out there.
It's funny, you go in the gate at China Lake and it says, what you see here, what you say here, it stays here. And it is like a larger version of Q's Laboratory from the James Bond movies. I mean, there's just stuff happening all the time. The snort track is there, the supersonic land-based rail track. You've probably seen it on Mythbusters and stuff where they accelerate things past the speed of sound on the ground, and that thing would fire, and it paralleled the road to the base. So you'd be like driving in one day, and the snort track would go off, and this sled would go past, going faster than the speed of sound. It's really hot there. Really hot. You learn to crack your windows because on certain days it would get above 120 and it could actually blow out your car windows. You did not leave a closed can of soda anywhere in the car because those would totally explode. Yeah, so it's a hot, barren wasteland out there, and that's why the weapons test center is there, and that's why VX-9's there. But it's there with VX-31, which is the weapons test squadron, which is the developmental squadron. So the way this works in Navy tests is that, there's the big test center out at Patuxent River. Those are the developmental test guys. Those are the test pilot school. That's Chuck Yeager type stuff going on out there. After they get all that figured out, and developmental test, DT, as we call them, this is good enough, throw it to OT. So they throw it over the fence to us. So you do not have to go to test pilot school to be assigned to VX-9 or any operational test squadron. They have their counterparts for the other platforms as well. The mission of the operational test squadron is to determine whether something, an aircraft, a weapon, a piece of gear, is effective and suitable. So is it effective in the mission? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And is it suitable? Can it be sustained? So that's what you do there. And at the time, I think there were 5 different type model series assigned to the squadron. We had Super Hornets, we had Legacy Hornets, we had Prowlers, we got Growlers, there were Hueys, there were Cobras, and Harriers. So that was probably more than 5 because we also did Marine sort of TAC Air development as well. So we had a token Air Force guy, we had a token RAF exchange guy that was there. We went back and forth between RAF and Royal Navy. Then we had the Marines flying helicopters and Harriers out there. So 06 Major Command, there's 2 06s, the skipper and the Chief Operational Test Director who fleets up to be an 06. And just a wild place, to be honest. I mean, it's CAVU, like 300 plus days a year there. You're inside a restricted area. You take off and do what you want to do. It's beautiful. But your job there is to test the new toys. And is the taxpayer getting what they were promised? And so we would put them through the paces. And if they broke, they broke. And then you had to write the report on why they break. Well, I don't know exactly, but here... but it broke and it can't do what it's supposed to do. Or, it does this with flying colors, but hey, it has problems still, whatever. And so you worked hand in hand with DT. We actually did integrated tests for Growler to make it go along faster. They brought us into the DT process very early on. So because of that, I was like, I don't know, probably first 5 or 6 people to fly a Growler in uniform as a lieutenant.
Okay, so you mentioned Growler, Prowler. I should have done a better job of kind of splitting everything up. You showed up as a Prowler guy and then went on to the Growler. How did that kind of work?
So, I showed up as a Prowler guy. This is one of those things, I tell the students this story a lot because one of my favorite quotes is from Seneca that says, luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And so when I was up at Whibby, I hated the weather because I always deployed in the summer. So I spent 9 months in drizzle every year and didn't care for that. One of my skippers had been in VX4 back in the day. So they combined VX5 and VX9 or 4 together to make VX9. And I saw the patch on his jacket one day. And what is that? So he tells me about it. I'm like, that sounds pretty good. Back then, the detailing process was you told your XO what you thought you wanted to do, and then the XO talked to PERS and worked it out. And so I had a department head that came to me when he found out that I was asking to go to VX9, and he said, hey, Cricket, don't go down there. I said, well, why? It sounds awesome. He's like, you're going to go down there. It's going to be a bunch of Hornet guys. You're going to have a Hornet skipper. And because of that, you probably won't do well. Break out in the group or whatever, right? Some parochialism, I guess is what he was alluding to. I got down there. And I said, you know what? Okay, thank you. And I guess I've always done this in my career. I always I did what I wanted to do within a reason because I always kind of figured that if I was interested in the job, I'd do a better job of the job, which would then lead to higher performance and better success. And so that's what I did. And so I went to VX9, got the weapons school en route, which was great. Showed up in VX9 and got down there as a Prowler guy. The EW shop was like 6 of us. So there's like 6 Prowler guys there. And I was there for about a year writing the schedule and, flying a Prowler. And they sent me to Lemoore to get a Cat 4 and a Super Hornet as well. So that was cool. So I could fly in the backseat of the F. I mean, you could fly in whatever you wanted to. The Cobra guys used to take us up all the time as well because the nav panel in the front seat of the Cobra was the same one as the one in the Prowler. So when they were short, we could hop in the front seat and input their waypoints and stuff for them. And then as payback, we got to shoot the gun, which was pretty cool. I did that, and I don't know. I showed interest in things. There was a a different OTD, operational test director. So when you get down there, at some point they assign you to a project, and that's your job as a lieutenant, to run the test and do whatever. So I had not done that yet. I was working in ops right in the schedule. There was another lieutenant that had an ARGM test. So the advanced, the follow on to the HARM, right? The AGM-88E at the time. And I had been to HARM U, which was the school for the weapon. And I said, you want to help with that? Well, somebody was in the room or something when I did this, and this plus a couple of maybe other things where I sort of stepped up and said, hey, can I help or do whatever? Anyway, this got me, my name was submitted to then be the Growler OTD, probably because I had enough time left in the squadron, maybe because I showed some interest in things and whatever, but I got chosen to be the Growler Operational Test Director, which was a high honor, to be quite frank. And because of that, I got sent to Pax River early to fly in the aircraft. First flight was at Pax River out over the Chesapeake with the X-23.
What was that first impression of the airplane, going from the Prowler now to the future of electronic attack?
So I'd already flown in the Super Hornet a couple times. And for those that don't know, the cockpits are exactly the same. The difference is there's additional screens available on the displays for Growler. There's additional pages that are in there. So that was super cool to see. Also, for those that don't know, they took the receiver system off the ICAP-3 Prowler and stuck it on the Growler. So what it really was a new amalgam of systems that I already knew, combined in a new and interesting way. It was just really great. I finally felt like I got a modern aircraft to fly, quite frankly. I had a lot of jealousy when I was going through the RAG because my winging classmates had made it through the VFA RAGs and were already out in the fleet. And so when Iraq went down the first time, I had buddies out dropping bombs and stuff. And I was still in the RAG because the VAQ RAG is the longest RAG in the Navy. Still is, I think. It took like a year and a half to get through it just because of the amount of stuff they teach you. And so I finally got my shiny new aircraft, and a couple of them I remember going and signing the books, and they had like 3 hours on them.
So that's acceptance flight from
the factory.
Yeah, and then
that was it. I was like the second one.
Wow.
Yeah, and I might have been the first guy to even sit in the back seat because the ferry flights were just the pilot bringing it out. Now that I think about it.
New airplane smell, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. New seat cushion. It was fantastic.
And you talked about, so and again, I'm kind of looking at models that are there behind me on the wall. So in the Prowler, that antenna, the receiver is going to be in the top of the tail, basically.
For the football.
The football, yeah, the football, yep. As opposed to on the wingtips on the Growler. That's kind of the easiest way, externally discernible if the ALQ-99 is not mounted or multiple are not mounted. A Growler versus Super Hornet, you can just visually tell there's no sidewinders on the wingtips. You're going to have the receivers, correct?
Yeah, correct. So they repackaged some stuff, and that's why there are small differences in the airframe between the Super Hornet and the Growler. So in the Prowler, all the receivers were up in the top of the vertical stab, right, the rudder and everything up top there. So same thing with ICAP-3, except they did put other receivers up and down the fuselage of the aircraft. It's physics. So if you want to intercept certain wavelength of signals, you've got to make them match the wavelength of the signal. And so it was the LQ-218, that's the receiver system. The LQ-99 is the jamming system, the pods, but they recombined those again. So we got the wingtip pods on the Growler, which house some of the receivers. There are other receivers. There's a couple of bulges and blisters. There's one behind the wing that houses one of the longer wavelength signals. There's another blister up on the nose that's part of that system.
No gun. The gun's been removed?
The gun has been removed. And I've got a funny story about an A-10 guy doing an ME phase while we were evaluating the aircraft about that. And it's absolutely hilarious. But yeah, they took the gun out. That's where the computer system is for the receivers. So they're all digital receivers, so you have to have a computer to analyze the signals and do all the stuff. It's called EAU, the Electronic Attack Unit. So that's in the gun bay. So there's no gun. The fairing, that doesn't even have a hole, so that's another visual difference. And then because of the wingtip pods being slightly different, they put in extra stall fences, and they filled in the shark tooth, or whatever you want to call it, on the wing. So ours is smoothed out a little bit. But otherwise, same aircraft. And so, we went back and forth flying Fs or Growlers, occasional Prowler flight still.
What was it like being on the very beginning of that airplane? I'm guessing you probably took the airplanes to a lot of air shows and people asked a lot of questions. And as a legacy guy, as a Prowler guy, I'm guessing there were times where you thought, man, I wish maybe this is something that's kind of misunderstood or not underappreciated about the Growler. Is there any kind of misconceptions that are out there that you think that maybe questions you've been asked repeatedly, like, no, actually, that's not the way we do it. That's not the reason we do it that way.
So, it's really funny. The pods are very unique looking, right? So they have a propeller on the front of them. And so it's the Raymer turbine, the RAT. At air shows, people will ask, well, what are those? And it depends on how long I've been standing out there. I've heard some very funny responses to them, like, oh, those are the swimmer delivery units. And they're like, what are you talking about? Well, we put a person inside there and we drop them in the water, and that's, it has a propeller. But what they really are is the amount of power that come out of these things. There's no way the aircraft itself could generate that much power. So we also joke that we were the first eco-friendly air warriors because we generate our own power to then send back to the enemy. But yeah, they generate all the power for those. Then the antennas are, in the bellies of the pods. But I think one of the other big misconceptions early on, people always asked about going from crew of 4 to crew of 2. And how do you do this? I used to tell people, imagine going from a Commodore 64 to a MacBook in terms of interface and just everything. It's a night and day difference. It is a quantum leap forward. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the CAPT-3 version of the Prowler was actually initially more capable than the first version of the Growler. A spiral development, whatever you want to call it. Not the case anymore. The Prowler's not in use anymore, but initially, yeah, there were still some things that they did better than the first iteration of the Growler.
Okay, so again, you kind of talked about VX9, a lot of the things that stay that are behind the curtain stay behind the curtain.
Absolutely.
One of the cool things that I think is coming, though, and there's photos in Combat Aircraft Magazine, it's not a secret, but the next generation jammer. So again, we can't speak in detail, but I guess I'll just throw another softball up there. Is it a worthy replacement? Is it going to really be exactly what we need after ALQ-99 and all the years of learning that have gone on with that system?
Well, I tell you what, number one, you really got to hand it to the original engineers that built the ALQ-99 back in the day. And part of it, I think, is back then they couldn't be quite so meticulous in their calculations and stuff like they can now. And so they built things to just last. It's like the 1955 Frigidaire refrigerator that you have at home that still keeps the beer cold, right? And, how does it do it? Well, it's sort of the same thing with the ALQ-99. They've been upgraded over the years. There's a large effort to keep them going. But, man, I tell you, we are to the end of the line with those things. And just like the Growler was a quantum leap from the Prowler, the next generation jammer is going to be a quantum leap from ALQ-99. So 1950s technology to modern technology.
That's fantastic. It's exciting that there's something cool coming down the pipeline. So, okay, stepping away from VX9, you're going to go be a training officer, and now we're going to talk about Libya. So, what's a training officer? What's that role in a squadron? Just kind of helping me kind of describe what that's like that you stepped back to the fleet.
Yeah, so the standard career path is you do your first JO tour, 3 years, you go off to shore duty, that's 3 years, and then you have a disassociated sea tour, or a second sea tour, depending on how they look at it. And it's 2 years long. If you are a weapons school guy like I was, part of the deal of going to weapons school is that you agree to serve as a training officer. So, again, as luck would have it, I am now both a Prowler patch and I am one of the few people that has a lot of time in the Growler. And so when they got ready to do the fleet introduction of it up at Whidbey, the first squadron of Growlers was VAQ-132, much like the first squadron of Prowlers was VAQ-132, which is why the squadron motto is first of the fleet and first of the fight, because they immediately took it into Vietnam, and as some foreshadowing, we immediately took it into Libya. I showed up to VAQ-132 up at Whidbey Island. At the time, the squadron was attached to CAG-17, so Air Wing 17. I forget which boat they were on because I never went to that boat. Showed up there. They were still in the RAG. They were wrapping up the transition from Prowlers to Growlers, so the squadron, I think, had just gotten safe for flight or something, and so I kind of had this period of time where I was getting ready for the squadron to be fully switched over to the Growler. Training officer, your job is to conduct the administration of the tactical training program in the squadron. So as an aviator, you have different levels, and they've now all been standardized across the enterprise, but there's level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. Level 2 is kind of your basic wingman qual, level 3 is your mission commander qual, level 4 is your strike lead qual, or element lead, seed mission commander for us. You then go on and get your strike lead qual in the air wing, and then level 5 is training officer in the training officer billet. So once you leave that billet, you're back to being a level 4. But while you're there, you're level 5. So I was in this weird nebulous place where I was a Prowler patch, but I had written or helped to write the Operational Tactics Guide, which is kind of the early user's manual of the jet from VX9, because we did a lot of stuff there. And we were quite thorough in how we tested it, and we had a lot of knowledge about the best way to use it, backed up with range data and actual science. It wasn't just somebody's good idea. And so that was my job. I had a brand new Growler squadron, and I needed to get them trained. And I did it the best I knew how. There was obviously a sub-list that was in play, and we got through all the events and stuff. And in order to deploy, you have to have a certain number of level whatevers in order to be certified to deploy. So there was a lot of work going on there. So we were boat up until, I want to say, maybe January of 2010. And then all of a sudden we get told, actually, you're going to be exped. The story behind this, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the story I was told was that there was like a Joint Chiefs meeting, and Chief of Staff of the Air Force was getting beat up about F-22 and how it had never deployed in support of GWAT. And the CNO, Admiral Roughhead, again, smart cookie, sitting there at the table, note to self, deploy new toy immediately. Well, in the air wing, you're tied to the air wing schedule, the boat schedule, all these other things, right? And we weren't set to deploy in the air wing for like another year and a half. Well, if you switch to XPED, we can send you like tomorrow. And so that's what happened, and that's why the first at least 3, if not 4, Growler squadrons were XPED. The initial ones were all XPED except for 141 that went to Japan to be the deployed FD&F squadron. So luckily, I'd done umpteen exercises with the Air Force at Nellis Air Force Base, and so when you're XPED, your main workup exercise is red flag. So okay, well, here I go back to Nellis. At one point at VX9, I was spending 3 months out of the year in Las Vegas. So I got real lucky because it was a well-beaten path for me, and I knew everybody at the weapons schools there. So
before we go past that, can I just ask, what's it like being part of a red flag? I've never talked to someone as a Navy player being part of that overall Air Force exercise.
It really, there's a lot of inter-service rivalry, and back in the day it was truly a thing, and now it's just jokes back and forth because we appreciate what they do and they appreciate what we bring to the table as well. But there was kind of 2 things about it. One is they do very large, it's 50-60 aircraft flying around at night in one range space, and so the deconfliction plan has to be just airtight, because if it's not, something bad's going to happen. And in a red flag, those are fleet units. Those are regular frontline Air Force units that are coming in. It is not ME phase or WISNT, as it's now called, which is the end exercise for the graduation exercise for the Air Force Weapons School. So you have, much like there's a launch sequence plan on the boat with who's launching when, there's a taxi plan, because you have to launch 50-60 aircraft off a single, or they have dual runways there, but depending on what that is, you have a taxi time, and you have to make that taxi time. And if you don't make that taxi time, you're going to wait till the end, and then you're going to have to flow into the fight after that. And if you were the critical thing, well, that didn't go so well. Everything's based around that, so you have to wrap your mind around that. And then at the beginning of it, it's like flying around in a massive stack. There's multiple locations, there's aircraft stacked up. It's, you're flying around with your wingman and all this, stuff going on. Flying around on goggles at night. Some of it's lights out. It's high-end training, and it's against a very good range. So there's a lot of threats there that are just high-end. I'll just leave it like that. It's top-tier training. And it's the Air Force, right? They got all the money for this stuff, and they spend it in the right places. Luckily, like I said, I was not new to it. So I was able to move through that stuff very quickly and to teach folks, hey, this is the environment you're in now. You have to do these things. Yes, this is normal now. So there were some cultural things that had to be taught too.
Okay, sir, I've distracted you to like 6 different times, and before I forget about it, let's talk about, you talked about the gun and the A-10 pilot, was it?
A-10, he was actually the skipper of the A-10 Weapons School.
So this is a red flag. Okay, perfect. Red flag story. It fits right.
Yeah, this is either a red flag or one of the times. Anyway, they all blend together at this point because I've done 13 or 14 of them. But yeah, so we're in the southern part of the range. We got the Growler. We have a new capability with the radar. We are now able to cross-tie signals that we see and then cross-tie that with radar returns. We were taking the game to a whole new level that we could never do in the Prowler. And so we have located a thing in the range, and we've now sicked the hounds on it. A B-1, a Strike Eagle, a flight of 4 A-10s that are now doing gun runs on it. And we get all the way back, we're in the debrief, and we get out of the debrief. In the hallway, the A-10 pilot stops me. He's like, "Hey, Cricket, man. Oh, man, that was awesome. Hey, dude, I was getting ready to call you down for a gun run. And then my wingman said, you don't have a gun. They took your gun, man?" He was having like this, it's like it didn't even calculate that you could be in an aircraft that didn't have a gun in it. And just the look of anguish on his face was just fantastic. And I was like, yeah, no, sorry, dude, they took the gun.
I love it. That's, where else other than a place like Red Flag, you're going to get an interaction like that where you guys can all stand around and, afterwards.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay, so you're done with Red Flag. Now are you guys ready to take the airplanes to war?
Yeah, so we deployed in the fall of 2010, and I got sent to the CAOC first.
Qatar.
Yeah, first time at the CAOC. I got sent out a little early to help get the CAOC ready for having growlers in theater because we were the first. And so I got there and started working with the EWCC, which is essentially the cell that does all the EW planning, now known as IMSO. So all the electronic warfare stuff. And so we're now at the final stages of Iraq. This is late 2010. We were based at Al Asad Air Base, west of Baghdad, old Iraqi Air Force base, great big long runway, lots of hardened aircraft shelters that still had holes in the roofs from when the precision guided munition had been dropped through them many years before. There were still old MiGs laying around. There was part of it that was still mined. Yeah, we had it's a little bit like MASH, right? We had a building and you could climb up on the roof somewhere along the way because there'd just been squadrons in there for 10 years. Somewhere in there'd been like a tri-wall of golf balls that had been delivered from some driving range that wanted to do their part. I've never been a golfer, but there were guys in the squadron that were, and so they would go up on this roof and drive golf balls off the roof like out into this big desert plain out there. But the pass down was, no, you don't go out there to get the golf balls because that's still mined. So we never went back to get the golf balls. But yeah, so we're there at Al Asad, my first land-based deployment. And yeah, we're doing more convoy escort. Things were much calmer at that point. But the other big difference, and this also kind of goes back to the time at Red Flag and it wasn't and that sort of stuff, is that the Air Force sees the Growler as a fighter. It's got a pointy nose, it's got a radar, it's got a missile. Check, check, and check. So there were times at the CAOC when I would have to explain that, yes, we could do a DCA cap near the Iranian border if you wanted us to. However, that's not what we're here for. And so kind of had to push them back towards, didn't you want all this convoy escort? Because that's what we're here for. And that's what we were doing. I don't know, I spent a month, 6 weeks there or something like that. Got back to the squadron Al Asad, started flying missions, doing all that stuff. And it was, I don't know, middle of February, we're sitting in the chow hall. I see the TVs going, Libya's starting to get spicy. And I remember making the comment, something like, maybe that'll light off and we'll go do that or something. A completely flippant remark. Well, you fast forward about 2 weeks and I was on the night schedule, so I slept during the day. And so I'd gone to bed as the sun was coming up. And I woke up in the afternoon and go over to the ops building. And as I'm walking over there, there's trucks driving around and forklifts and like palletized stuff going everywhere. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I walked into the ops space, and the opso was standing there, and he's like, Cricket, go pack your stuff. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, we got to fly to Italy tonight. I'm like, oh, okay. So went back, threw all my stuff in a bag or a box or whatever. I rode the tanker. We got to Aviano, flew through the night, got one hop tanking from Al Asad to Aviano, got there the next morning, checked in to the base. They went and put us in a room to go back to sleep. Woke up that evening because we were going to be the first night into Libya. So squadron commander in the lead jet. I had turned over training officer at that point because I was getting pretty long in the tooth. So I think I was the quality assurance officer or something, working in maintenance. But having been the training officer, so I was in the backseat of Dash 2 with Joe Behan, B-Stick, JO pilot. And current training officer was with squadron commander in the lead jet. Somebody else had done the mission planning, and yeah, we were going to go down from northern Italy all the way down. There was supposed to be a tanker bridge. We had a divert at Sigonella about halfway down, and after that, there's no diverts. So fuel was obviously a concern, and then they had some SA-5s down there. Very long-range surface-to-air missile made for shooting down strategic bombers. But I also knew that they're such a large missile, especially at night, it's going to look like the space shuttle taking off. So they were in a few sites along the coast. They were very concerned about that. And because of that, they had told us some standoff ranges that didn't make a lot of sense to me as a technician. So I kind of brought this up and was told to shut up and color, and I said, okay, fine. The other interesting thing about it was we had AMRAAM, but we didn't have any harm. We had been sent to Iraq with no harm because we were just going to be flying convoy escort. So we actually were sent there with no AMRAAM either. But the 31st Fighter Wing there at Aviano had spare AMRAAM. They didn't have any spare harm. And so they gave us some AMRAAM. We had those loaded up. So we're flying with live AMRAAM, no harm. We've got 3 pods on the jet and 2 drop tanks. And we got to do some low band jamming. And for those that don't know, when you do low band jamming in the Prowler, it interferes with the radios. So it backfeed static through all your radios. You can't hear anything. When you're doing that, you're essentially deaf. So we got out to the jet. B-Stick and I get in the jet. We fire the jet up. Got a problem with the radar. Radar's not working. So he and I were both Prowler guys. We didn't have a radar in the Prowler. So we went without a radar because, hey, now we're back to Prowler now, right? And
lead nose on night 1.
Yeah. And so off we go. Luckily, they weren't assessed to have much of an Air Force, but at that point we're flying with fancy candlesticks underneath our plane there with the AMRAAM, but whatever. And so we get airborne and get on the tanker bridge. We get going down there. And we made it on station. The weather was not great, and we were completely midnight on the lights. Lights completely off. Not even IR strobes or anything, like completely off. We had goggles. B-stick lost sight of lead at some point, at which point I said, okay, well, I mean, we were separated in altitude, but let's just get away from each other at this point, because I would rather not have a midair in the middle of the night over the Gulf of Sidra. About that time, I heard on the radio flight F-16s that were engaging in SA-8. I could actually see it on the receiver system. I said to B-Stick, we're going in because we're not doing anything out here. These guys are actively getting shot at. We're going in.
And that's your job, is to protect
That's their job, right? So I know what they said in the brief, but I'm not going to be able to walk away from this with a clear conscience, so let's go do the thing. So we drove into a couple miles off the coast and started giving them the business with the pods. So F-16 shot some harm. There was some great pod footage of the harm actually impacting the SA-8.
the harm itself.
The harm itself.
I know there's been photos in, I want to say it's Ukraine, of like harms laying places and people, it misfire. I mean, you think of the harm, that warhead, and hopefully I'm not going to touch anything that I shouldn't, but generally the harm doesn't actually impact the missile itself.
So it's a fragmentation warhead,
exactly,
because it's made to destroy the radar dish.
It's going to explode and throw out tons of frag.
Yeah. It's like a giant shotgun blast, right? But what people don't understand is that the harm is like really long. I don't know the exact measurement, but it's close to 10 feet long, right? The rest of it is pipe that's going very fast. So even though the shotgun shell's up front, the rest of it still has to go somewhere. And so, it kept on trucking. And so it's some cool footage of that. But that's all complete now. Everybody's alive. Everything's great. And we've been low band jamming the whole time. So every once in a while, I'll turn the jammers off real quick to like see if what I can hear real quick and then turn them back on. But I can see, between, we did have link for some reason. So I could kind of see what was going on there and some other stuff. But the other jet was jamming in the link band, which has effects. So anyway, we're operating steaming by ourselves here. So independent steaming. And so we get that all done. There was a bingo number with fuel. We are now, I'm like, we got to get out of here, dude. So we start heading north. At some point, I start calling on the radio. And they answered us, and they were like, oh my gosh, we thought you got shot down. No, we're still here. We got put together, and I'll be honest, this was the scariest part of the whole mission, which was not what I expected. We got joined back up. The tanker was not where it was supposed to be. The skipper makes a great command decision. Okay, no kidding, bingo profile to Sigonella. So we start climbing, which those that have actually ever executed a no kidding bingo, it is extremely uncomfortable on the way up when you are burning a ton of gas, because you're supposed to get paid on the backside, but you're always wondering if you're really going to get paid on the backside, right? Checks in the mail, right? And so we climb all the way up. We're on a path to Sigonella. Well, the tanker shows up finally, says, hey, well, I'm here. And the skipper says, cool, well, we're over here. So you can either run us down. If you run us down, great, we'll take gas, but we're on our way to Sigonella. As we're getting close to Sigonella, another thing I never knew about the Mediterranean, because I was never an East Coast guy and never operated there. There are gigantic thunderstorms that build up there, just towering cumulonimbus. And this is at night. And there's so much lightning in this thing that it's almost internally illuminated. And it is moving across Sicily. And it's like just enough, man, if we skirt this thing, we can get into Sig. So B-Stick, in a fantastic bit of piloting, snuggles up next to Skipper. And we start bouncing around, going through the outer edges of this thunderstorm. And that's honestly when I thought maybe I was going to die the second time. I thought we were going to take a pod through the canopy. I mean, it was like Blue Angel tight.
Because if you lose sight, you're done.
Yeah.
There's no rejoin at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's no radar in your jet to find them.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So we make it through. We make it to the field. We land. At this point, I am also thinking I'm going to lose my wings because I kind of disobeyed the brief.
Were you okay with that?
I was. I told B-Stick, I said, hey, dude, I'm senior in the plane here. I'll take all the blame. You're fine. Skipper still doesn't know this, by the way. So anyway, if you hear this, Skipper, I'm sorry. So we land, and I'm expecting to just, here it comes, right? So Growlers have their own boarding ladder that comes down out of the leading edge extension, right? So we can get out of our own plane. But somebody's got to slide off the back. So I get out, slide off the back, come around, hit the button. Now the ladder's down, right? So now B-Stick can get out. B-Stick is a large human being, by the way. He's like 6'5". So we get him down, and then all these F-16s are also diverting in there, right? Because the tanker wasn't where it was supposed to be. And I'm looking around. F-16 has no ladder of any type. So I'm like, okay, how are these guys going to get down? I'm going to catch them? How are we getting them down? I look around, and I find some sort of boarding ladder laying around on the side. I pick this thing up, take it over. I don't know, man. Does this work? Yeah, it does. Okay, great. They come down. They're like high-fiving. The guy that shot the harm was like a brand new first lieutenant. It was everything you can imagine, right? All good. Here comes Skipper. All smiles, all grins. He's having a great time. All right, good. Well, we'll just leave that part out of the debrief. And and that was the first night. But I'll tell you, the scariest part was the bingo profile and the weather getting into Sigonella. And, we flew the jets back the next day, and then that started the rest of Odyssey Dawn, which was just absolutely, yeah. There was a lot of ordnance dropped in those 10 days before NATO took over. A lot of stuff. AC-130. They wouldn't go feet dry unless we were on station.
Has to be a good feeling.
It is. It is. A frustrating thing later in that time period, there was I found an SA-6 hiding in a tree line, but I didn't have a targeting pod and I didn't have a bomb, and there was nobody on station with one. And all I could do was call it in. I'm like, well, you got lucky today, dude. And then we got vectored onto a Toyota one night. This was, we had this is later on in Unified Protector. NATO's taken over now. It's NATO AWACS. We came off the tanker. We just gotten our RTB fuel. We got vectored onto this contact. First of all, the AWACS says, "Hey, do you have a radar?" I said, "Yeah, I have a radar." "Do you have a pod?" "No, I don't have a pod." "What do you have?" I said, "I got goggles and a radar, man." He said, "What, do you have an AMRAAM?" "Yes, I have an AMRAAM." Where are you going with this? "Okay, well, I need you to investigate track number blah, 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 blah." Okay, punch it in the system. Comes up. It's like 120 miles inland in Libya. And I'm like, okay.
How important is this?
Yeah, just, dude, happy to do it. But while I'm gone, you need to find me more gas. So off we go. Me and Fape, my pilot. Waif, sorry, he'd been a Fape. Waif was his call sign. Weak index finger. So you can figure out what that, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. BFM flight with a F5 where he never actually quite got the trigger pulled. So anyway.
It happens, I'm sure.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens. Off we go. We got this track. And we're like, where is this thing? And we're going out there, and it's really slow moving, and it was really low altitude. At the time, they thought there were helos moving around at night. And they're declaring this thing bogey the whole time. And we're going out there, and I'm like, what is this? And we're talking, maybe it's a helo, this, the other. Okay, what are we going to do? And we get all the way out there, and he has a great idea about how to use the system to figure out exactly what's going on. So he does this, and suddenly it's incredibly obvious that whatever this track is moving along a road at 85 miles an hour. So dark desert highway, wind in our hair. We get all the way out there, and I look down with my goggles, and I can see tail lights. They declared it a bandit.
I mean, a kill
before
kill
this
is
happened.
what I'm hearing.
Yeah, but I'm like, there's a couple of times, and I'm like, I'd never live that down.
You shot a truck.
If we put a AMRAAM into the tailgate of a Toyota Hilux, yeah, if it would have even guided and fused, which is another question, right? But
someone's got to try. Someone's got to
right. So I'm like, okay, great. Off we go.
Good.
Did you get that gas I wanted? Okay, awesome. I'm going home. So that's what we did.
Okay, well, as dumb as this might sound, I think I experienced Odyssey Dawn, Unified Protector. I experienced this like most Americans, which is I watched it on TV. I remember I was a college student in 2011. But for those of us that weren't there, for those of us that weren't on night one, that weren't so intimately involved, is there any takeaway or anything maybe you would kind of share for those that don't get to experience it quite sitting in the back of the Growler?
I would just say that from my spot in the cheap seats, as I escorted umpteen strikes, B-1s attacking bunkers, a 24-plane F-16 strike from 4 different countries on 4 different axes on a ammunition dump outside of Tripoli. Let me tell you, when the U.S. and our allies bring the full weight of what they can bear onto something, it is impressive.
Okay, so kind of scribing our way across the globe. Good Lord. Now we've got Libya. Let's get to Afghanistan. What was it like flying as a department head and flying in support of combat missions there?
Yep, so got back from Libya. That was the end of my time in VAQ 132. So I got transferred for my department head tour to VAQ 135. And as mentioned, the first few Growler squadrons were all exped. So now I'm in another exped squadron. And this squadron had just finished being safe for flight, had just finished the swap over to Growlers. This was fantastic, though, because there were just some fixtures of the VAQ community that were my fellow department heads and also, Skipper and XO. So this was a fantastic squadron in terms of the camaraderie and everything that went down in the Ravens during my time there for my department head tour. But this time around, we're getting sent to Afghanistan for fighting season for 2012. And we're getting sent to Bagram. First time Growler is in Afghanistan. So off we go. And we do the transland to get there, which we had before in 132 as well, but different group, different experience. And so we get all the way there. And it is, closest thing is probably like maybe what the Marines lived like during Vietnam at like Da Nang or something, right? Like it's tense. Accommodations were not great. Luckily, it was not snowing and muddy because that's what happens in the winter there. I'd done a site visit over there in the winter, and I was like, wow. So newfound respect for the guy that is out in the Korengal Valley in a fire base for 15 months. Man. So had all that loaded up, and we get ready to support missions in Afghanistan. The difference is in Afghanistan, sometimes they're convoys, but if they're convoys, they're moving troops and it's like a sweep or something. We did a lot of coverage of special operations forces, insertions and extractions to make sure that they wouldn't get ambushed. We essentially removed the enemy's ability to coordinate attacks. So we would show up and do that, and then we'd move on to something else, somewhere else across the country. So typical mission there, 6 hours or so. I was used to it from Libya because that was like an 8-hour gig. By the time you did 2 hours each way and then 4 hours on station. And Afghanistan, very similar. We were in Bagram, so up in the northern part of the country, we could get there quick if need be. There's plenty of gas, all that good stuff. So we kind of were the flying brigade around taking care of stuff. TICs, troops in contact, obviously would get our attention. We get retasked to shutting down a firefight, an ambush that was in play. It's always something when you change the radio over to check in with whatever ground unit's supposed to be there, and you can hear the bullets snapping in the background. I have a memory of a Australian Special Forces guy. We were covering an extraction, came up on the frequency and gave the guy a call, and he answers up, and it's obviously an Australian, and he's like breathing heavy because he's running to the extraction site, and there's bullets snapping in the background.
Does it change your response any? I mean, no matter what, you have to be good at your job, but does it make you better, more concentrated, more focused?
Oh, absolutely. You're double, triple checking stuff, and then, it goes in the next flight. Okay, you know what? Nothing is ever the same here. So we may think I'm using the same thing tonight, but I'm going to use it in a different way. So I need to make sure I've done my homework to ensure that I'm not the part that fails. So absolutely. We do a lot of coverage for extraction of personnel, not snatch and grabs, not our guys, bad guys. And that was like deer hunting. We would go and get in the deer stand and wait until it was time. And sometimes the deer never came along, and sometimes they did. And so that was pretty gratifying. We would get the intel briefs later, and we had this like wall of bad dudes in the ready room, guys that had been picked up and taken out of circulation on missions that we were supporting. So that was important. It was important for our troops to see that too, the sailors that joined the Navy, and now they find themselves at an air base in Bagram getting mortared. I think we got mortared 28 times while we were there. So, indirect fire was always a thing. It wasn't aimed. It was just, if it happened to you, it was bad luck. But yeah, so that's what we did. And longest mission there was either a 9.6 or a 10.1. Was not scheduled to be that long. Got airborne one night, went to our first service, the first JTAR. We're on that one doing, it's just another Tuesday or whatever. Troops in contact at a outpost that was north of Kandahar, up near this dam. And so we go over there, check in with the guy. We would provide effects, but the guys wouldn't know what to ask for. Because it can be a surgical thing, or I can hit you with a sledgehammer. And they wouldn't even know what to ask for. The guy was like, he's like, they're in the wire. Like, they're inside the perimeter. And I'm like, okay, I'm shutting it all down. And so I loaded up every single pod with an assignment, as much as I could do, and just took it all out. I didn't even care about, there's this thing called a JRFL, which is a Joint Restricted Frequency List. There's certain frequencies you're not supposed to jam for certain reasons and whatever. And I said, whatever. And let it rip. And I told the guy, I said, I will come back up on this frequency in 10 minutes. I can't hear you while I'm doing this. So if you try to call me and I don't answer, that's why. So I came back up 10 minutes later. He's like, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. I'm like, okay. So come to find out, we were completely shutting down the Taliban's ability to coordinate their attack. So, we're not an RC-135. I can't figure out where they're talking, but I'll just shut it all down for you. And so that's what we did. And we finally got to where we had to go get gas. And I said, dude, we'll be back in 25 minutes. He's like, okay. So we go get gas, come back. And we just kept doing this over and over and over and over. Tabs tanked 6 or 7 times that night. And by the end of it, by his last tanking, it was good. The sun was coming up now, and they were walking around, clearing out the last part of it. Okay, we can go home now. I had to give him a little pep talk to, all right, man, listen, dude, we got to get this gas so we can go home. He's like, I'm so tired. I'm like, yep, I know. We'll do this together, okay? As much as I can help from the back seat. But we got our gas and went home, and yeah, so that was like the longest combat mission I ever did.
That's incredible. I mean, that example of teamwork, again, we talk about, literally can't happen without the both of you. You can be the best in the back, but you know what? At a certain point, if he can't get the jet on the ground safely or get back to the tanker, it has to be both of you working together. That has to be an immense feeling of pride. You talked earlier about your maintainers, and I'm really glad you did. Was that something that, I have Air Force friends that have been able to, hey, bring some of the maintenance guys in the shop and show them a tape of something. Was that something that you could communicate it to them so they knew? I think you already mentioned it, but Was it something that they felt, that feeling of pride that, yeah, we're not just living here in maybe not great conditions for nothing? They understood how valuable what you were doing was.
Yeah, and Mongo Janik, who was the skipper, what a great leader. He is probably one of the most thoughtful people that I know, and he realized early on, we have a small intel contingent. We have an intelligence officer, we have a couple intel petty officers, and he realized very early on, because everybody in a Growler squadron has a clearance. They pretty much have to have one. And so he's like, why can't we tell them what we did last night and show them the picture of the dude that we helped roll up or whatever? And so that's what he started to do. And that was really, really, I think, important to keep everybody in the fight. Why am I here? Okay, well, this is why you're here. And it was very impactful for him.
Okay, so up into this part of the career, a lot of time, a lot of deploying, a lot of hard work. At some point, we're going to go, sea tour, back to a shore tour, in this case, a staff tour. Where'd you go next?
So I'd been flying for close to 13 years straight at this point, and post-department head in the Navy, they kind of give you, we ran you pretty hard, so here, what do you want to do? And I always told myself I would never go get a master's degree on my own, but if the Navy sent me to get one, then I would go get one. So being from Missouri, I said, hey, I want to go to the Army Command and General Staff College at Leavenworth. And the detailer said, when do you want to leave? Tomorrow? You want to leave tomorrow?
Was it hard to fill those spots for them?
Extremely hard.
Really?
Yeah, extremely hard. In fact, they used to have to draft Navy guys. Yeah, there's a joint requirement that in every small group there has to be a sea service officer of some type. So that part was not hard to get. The first time I ever bundled orders was that. I said, well, I want Leavenworth, and then I want to go to Stratcom right after that, which is right up the road in Omaha. And he's like, well, listen, man, I can't write you the Stratcom orders until you get checked in at Leavenworth, but you can expect that. I said, okay, great. So off I went to Leavenworth. For those that don't know, it's right outside of Kansas City, Missouri. So it's just northwest of Kansas City, Missouri. It is they call it ILE in the Army and the Air Force, but kind of the 04 education. The Navy does not value schools, really. The Navy is the 4-H model, the learn by doing. Well, you just go to sea. You'll figure it out. And the Army and the Air Force are not like that at all. So culture shock there. But the interesting thing, again, I was lucky enough. I submitted my application to be picked up for a program called the Art of War Scholars Program. And this was a history scholars program at Leavenworth. I was lucky enough to be selected for it. I was one of 2 Navy guys in the group. And then with my aviation background, I then had to write a thesis for my master's degree in history. And my undergrad's in engineering, so I'm not exactly a writer. And I said, okay, well, what do I know? Well, I know airplanes. And so my topic for my thesis was fixed-wing air losses over North Vietnam. So I compared essentially Rolling Thunder and Linebacker. A lot of things had changed between the two, this, the other. And so part of that was I had tracked down some just giants of that period. Chuck de Bellevue, 6 MiG kills. He's the leading ace from Vietnam. He was a Rio, I guess, in a F4, Air Force F4. Roger Locker, same squadron, 2 MiG kills. Got shot down the second day of Linebacker 1. 23 days evading on the ground. Another guy named Bill Schwerfigger, F4 pilot, shot down in February 72. On the Navy side of things, a man named John Pianetta, 254 missions in an A7 over the north as a Lieutenant JG and Lieutenant. So just fantastic interviews with these guys. I was lucky enough to go meet all the Air Force guys at the University of Kansas and sit down with them in a room and ask them questions about the tactics back then and the actual air warfare back then. And really sort of the thing that blew me away about it, they normally get asked about their experiences as being a POW or evading or that sort of stuff. Nobody asks them questions that often. I mean, don't get me wrong. They've been interviewed many, many times for many books on the subject, but their recall about the events is startling. I mean, they can remember what range they hosed a missile off or something. And maybe it's because they told the story so many times. But I was struck by that. And I was also struck by, and this is just a aviation thing, I truly believe it. It was like we were all sitting in the ready room as peers. And I was like, what'd you do about this thing or whatever? Oh, yeah, that thing. Yeah. Being, 30 years separated, completely different generation. I mean, these are big guys, right? And immediately being accepted. Oh, you're one of us. That was just so striking to me. It made such an impression upon me. And that's what I remember from that interview.
Okay, so I think one of the main trends of this conversation is a lot of things we can't talk about. The next tour, especially, let's just breeze past it, but what was Stratcom all about? U.S.
Strategic Command is about our nation's nuclear deterrent, and I was involved with that. So, as you can imagine, there are some sensitivities to that one, they don't really make for great conversation in the first place, and 2, I can't talk about them. So
Perfect. Okay, from there, command. Man, going back to, again, Prowler guy, grown up in the Prowler, done incredible things in the Growler, and now you're going to go back to be the leader, right? I don't think it gets any better than the command tour. Maybe it does, and we'll talk about that at the end here, hopefully. But what was it like commanding? It was 132, correct?
Yeah.
Back to 130. Yeah, what's that like?
Yeah, so back to 132. So I'd done, I was a two-timer on 135, and then I get the call, hey, do you want 132?
How did you find out, by the way? You say you get the call. Was it literally PERS? Was it Millington?
Well, so this is where it gets a little weird. I did not screen for command my first time around. So, and this may be of value, I guess. I was a Kool-Aid chugger. I was on the golden path.
Can you describe what a Kool-Aid chugger is, sir? For those that might not be familiar with that great Navy term.
Drinking the Kool-Aid,
yes,
right?
Yes,
so,
yes.
Whatever the Navy says I should do, okay, well, let's go do that. That sounds good, right? So that's what I had done. Slight variations. I went to VX9 when everybody else kind of went to the RAG and was a RAG instructor. Okay, I chose to go do that, but yep, training officer, check. Okay, great. Department head, check. Yep, did well as a department head. Awesome, check. Everybody, all indications were that I would screen for command. So that's what I thought was going to happen. And then it didn't happen. Probably to this day, the biggest sense of betrayal I've ever felt in my life. In retrospect, I'm glad it happened. And here's why. When you are a Kool-Aid chugger and everything's going your way, yeah, there's tough times, but there's not a lot of adversity. And ever since I was a JO, all I ever wanted to do was command a squadron because I had a fantastic skipper, Pat Walsh, Uke Walsh, when I was a JO, the guy that told me to take the long field gear. But just a great skipper. And he told me, I remember him telling me this, he goes, Cricket, whether somebody stays in the Navy or not is completely based on their first tour. And so I wanted to be in a position to make things awesome for the squadron. And so I just thought squadron command would just be the cat's pajamas, right? So I'd been working towards that for 15 years. I mean, longer than that if you count the academy time, right? So then, have no indication that it wasn't going to go your way. And then it doesn't go your way. I still remember I was standing in the aisle of a Hy-Vee grocery store in Omaha, Nebraska, looking at Jell-O on the shelf when I got a text. And it was from a buddy of mine. We were both up that year, and neither one of us got it. And it took a while to get over that. I'll be dead honest with you. But what it did, though, was it made me reevaluate my life and reprioritize my life. This profession requires you to lay a lot of things on an altar, and your family lots of times gets the short end of the stick. And I had been doing that. And now that I had been rejected by the Navy, it caused me to reevaluate all that. That, in turn, made me a better commanding officer because it made me more aware that not everybody in the Navy is a Kool-Aid chugger. And that some people have their priorities correct. And they value their families and being with their families. That was also the first time that I realized I had this sort of epiphany. Everybody gets out of the Navy at some point. But when you're that young and you're like, yep, everything's going great. I'm just going to keep going the way I'm going. Nothing can stop me. And then you get stopped. And you just have this moment. So I spent about a year working through that, waiting for my second look at command. And during that time, I got to replan the rest of my life, right? And so I was like, okay, how do rich people get rich? It's passive income streams, by the way. But car washes and mini storage. But anyway, next year comes around. Command board every year is different. They choose them differently. And so now I'm a second look guy, and I'm not expecting much out of this, I'll be honest. And I screened for the weapons school skipper this time around. So, okay, great. Well, I'm going to go be the weapons school skipper. Awesome. So be flying Growlers. So for about a month, I thought that's what was going on. And then I got a phone call, and they said, hey, man, do you want to be a CAG? And I was like, no, why are you asking me this? Well, did you ever want to be a CAG? The commander of the air wing on the boat.
Big deal. Big job. Yeah,
big job. 06 job, right? And I was like, no. Why? Well, do you still want to command a squadron? I was like, yeah, absolutely. I want to. Okay, well, how about 132? Yeah, perfect. The reason they asked me that is because you're not supposed to do 3 exped tours in a row. So if you're an exped department head, you're supposed to go to a boat squadron. And so that's where this got a little weird.
It sounds like they were trying to help out in that regard.
They were trying to look out for me, I guess. But, at the end of the day, I was overjoyed, right? So still going back to Wibby, but now I'm going back to the Scorps, right? The Scorpions. And so I got up there in 2017 and still exped, did XO and CO tour with the Scorps and, more trips to Vegas, more red flags. That's why I say I've done 13 or 14 of them throughout the years. And then we do a Western Pacific deployment right after I took command. Based out of Misawa, Japan, went to Guam, went to Korea, went to Kadena, Okinawa, and just kind of out there on the forward edge. in the Pacific, working for Task Force 70 out there. Admiral Thomas, who's now 7th Fleet. But yeah, great individual.
So far, we spent a lot of time talking about the fun stuff in many ways, which is the airplanes and the tactics and, good Lord, combat. I mean, it doesn't get much more rewarding than that. I think being the boss is more than that, though, because it's the people. Any good stories with the sailors and kind of some interactions that you maybe look back on fondly from your time in command?
Yeah, so we have DEOC surveys and things like that in the squad. They're climate surveys for those that aren't initiated to the wonders of them.
It's all anonymous. You get to say whatever.
Yeah, it's all anonymous. It's like, this place sucks and whatever.
And here's exactly why.
Yeah, right. And a lot of it's real cryptic and you can't figure out what it is, but some of it's survey questions. And so part of it, there's like a job satisfaction question on there. And the lower enlisted had really low job satisfaction. And I got to think about it. And I was like, is it job satisfaction or is it life satisfaction? Because their life is their job right now. They live in the barracks. They come to work, don't leave the base like on the daily. So which is it? And so I started out on this whole thing of like, what is this, guys? You got a plan? What are you doing? You moving forward in life? Because if you're not satisfied, that's probably why. You have no plan. I'm not going anywhere, whether you realize it or not. Probably be traced back to that. So started out on a thing with that. I had a sailor. We were on deployment, and she was an older sailor, one of my CTTs. So we have cryptologic technicians that go with us. Very bright young lady. She'd been working on her bachelor's degree for many years, and she finished it while we were on deployment. And she was so excited. She came up to me in the hallway and, Skipper this and Skipper, it was fantastic. That day we were also doing a safety stand down or something. The whole squadron was going to be together. And luckily there was like an AV system, like somebody from the base, we were in Masawa, somebody from the base was coming to give like some presentation or something. So there was an AV system set up, and I said, can somebody, what's the graduation song, Pomp and Circumstance or whatever, right? Can somebody download this real quick or somebody get this queued up? And we did. And I forget how I got her diploma from her. I was like, well, let me look at that for a second. I just like walked off with it or whatever. She probably was like,
classic maneuver.
Where's he going with that? But, I just, at the beginning of it, I said, okay, great. And, well, hey, listen, CTT2 completed her degree. She can't walk at the university, so she's going to walk here and hit it, and we start the Pomps and Circumstance, and she comes up and gets her diploma and does the stuff and, whatever, nobody cheers. And, you do what you can while you're gone, right? Because that's your family while you're out there. And I treated them all like my family. Sailors have ups and downs, and some go down and they don't come back up, and some of them go down and they do come back up. I had a young petty officer he was frocked. Yeah, he was frocked to first class. I'm trying to remember the exact details with this. He was a frocked first class. For those that don't know, he's wearing the rank, but he's not actually the rank yet.
Not getting to pay for
for it, and that's not his permanent rank either.
Yeah, roles and responsibilities, but...
Yeah. So why this becomes important is because he goes home on leave, and the guy was super quiet, real mild-mannered, goes home on leave, and we get a call from the local police department that he's in jail for drunken disorderly. And I'm like, what? You sure you got the right guy? I would not have believed it, but the police department sent us the body cam footage, and I was just blown away. So we got to take this guy to mast. And my... I guess philosophy with MAST is it's not just about the person, it's about a message that gets sent. And this has happened before we were going on deployment. We're going to go to all these places. We're in foreign countries. I can't have international incidences and whatever. And, drunken disorderly's no way to go through life anyway.
And for those that might be unfamiliar, when we say captain's mast, you're the boss. There is a tremendous amount of power. You can take pay, you can take rank.
Right. So in this particular case, since he was frocked to first, he got busted all the way down to third, which is what happened. He made first again by the time I was leaving. So power of redemption, right? Now I got another one that goes the other way. Another sailor who was going to get kicked out of the Navy for higher tenure. So back then you had to make a certain rank by a certain time in service, or the Navy said, okay, well, you're not progressing, so thanks very much for your service and we'll see you. He was coming up against his higher tenure, and he's one of our PRs. So I'd see him every time I went flying. I go in there and say, hey, PR3, did you study for your exam today? I was the XO at the time. Oh, no. I'm like, okay, I'm going flying. You're going to study while I'm gone. Every time I go down there, same thing. So he takes the exam and he makes second. So now he's out from under the higher tenure thing. The touching part of this for me was he asked me to pin his rank on. Could have had one of his buddies do it, but he asked me to do it as the XO. So absolute honor for me to go do that. I was so happy. Fast forward a year, we're coming back from Labor Day, unit sweep, year analysis. We get the results back. Pop's hot.
And it's out of your hands.
It's out of my hands.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do.
Mandatory separation.
Yeah. Gosh, that's tough.
So one bad decision, right? And so I talked to the guy. What happened? He tells me. And, okay, well, we're going to mast, right? So we do that. And he just said, Skipper, can I talk to the squadron before I go? I said, yeah, you can talk to the squadron. So he goes down there. I get the squadron together. And he essentially tells the entire squadron, don't be me. Showed a lot of character, right? It's ups and downs. It's man, I tell you, Squadron Command, absolute highlight of my career. You're at that level where you know a lot about everybody, and it's 200 and some odd people, and you know them all by name, and it takes a little while to learn all the names, but you learn all the names, and then you pick up more details about them, and this, the other, and the different ranks are like, different ages of kids, because they're all yours, and you're responsible for all of them. And you've got like the more senior ones that are like the teenagers and the 20-year-olds that are taking care of the toddlers, and and it's on the officer side too. The brand new officers are
toddlers is a bit exaggerated.
Yeah, right. So absolutely the most rewarding thing I've ever done in the Navy, Squadron Command. I'd have done it forever if they'd let me. It was just fantastic.
Okay, well, you said it doesn't get any better. I might challenge that by saying where we're sitting right now, I cannot imagine that it is a bad job being here as the Commodore Training Air Wing 6. Again, more softballs. I kind of want to brag about this place because it's been very special for me for the 2.5 years that I've been here. But what's it like being the big guy here at Wing 6, sir?
It's like winning the lottery.
I've heard that more than once.
Yeah.
Winning the lottery.
It's like winning the lottery. October of 2021, I got a phone call from the Admiral. Said, "Cricket." I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "Pack your sea bag." And I was like, "What ship, sir?" He's like, "Well, actually, it says Pensacola here next to your name, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm more than a little bit jealous." This is what he said to me.
Pack your sea bag. Well done. It's like walking into a brief with a pink sheet of paper, and you didn't fail the student, but you just want to keep them on the edge of their seat.
Right.
I respect it.
Yeah, he was Admiral Wheeler, retired now, a PRA guy, P3s, P8s. Just fantastic dude. He was the chief of staff at Stratcom. I'd worked for him previously in another job there before I, was in the desk I was sitting at when he called. But he was the senior aviator at Stratcom, and so it was fantastic to hear it from him. So yeah, it's I kind of joke that every naval aviator comes through here and they spend their entire career trying to get back here. And as you know, coming back for your shore duty here, and thank you for everything you've done here. You did a lot more than your standard Mark 1 Mod 0 instructor here, so thank you. But 06 Command is it's a different animal than 05 Command is for sure. There's 3 squadrons, a reserve component, an international squadron that's here. Flight school is different than it was when I went through. And everything kind of feels like it has come full circle. The first inkling of that was standing on the stage there in the museum at my first wing. And so we have one primary squadron now, VT-10. VT4 is now the intermediate and advanced squadron for what I like to call the big wings, P8s, E6s, E2s. Still have VT-86. It's still the advanced jet squadron here, but the flow is a little bit different. And let me tell you, the level of training that we do here now, I might not have passed when I went through 20-some years ago. I was blown away by how much the bar has moved in an upward direction. I truly believe that the naval flight officers that we wing here are very well prepared to go to the FRS and then go on out to the fleet. We've got a different generation of students that are very studious. They're very focused. Their priorities are different than my generation's priorities in a good way. And because of that, they kind of make my job pretty easy. There's the occasional sad story that still happens around here, but it's okay. It's nothing that's not recoverable. And it's just fantastic to work here.
We talk about previewing the future and some of the new things that are spooling up. But fortunate to fly with ASCANs, and my wife still thinks that's a made-up term. Astronaut candidates in the back of a T-6. Some great international students, really wonderful memories from some of the flights with some of our Saudis and Germans and Norwegians as well. But also something very new, and they don't fly, but they do a lot of simming, and they're getting ready to go work in the future of naval aviation, is our MQ-25 warrants. So maybe you kind of talk about, for those that are unfamiliar with what that path is, warrant officers in naval aviation is something that we've tried before and that we've kind of done away with and come back to. But again, a lot of newness and a lot of excitement there as well.
For sure. So for those that don't know, we have air vehicle pilots, AVPs now, that we train here, and they do sort of a modified syllabus. They do knife, which is the artist formerly known as API. They do simulators. They don't fly, but they do simulators to learn aviation. They do the ground school, they do the simulators at VT-10, and then they move to VT-4 and are taught the console. So how are they going to use the MQ-25? So those that don't know, the MQ-25 is the carrier-based autonomous vehicle tanker, which has a lot of potential for other things too, but its first job is to be the tanker on board the carrier, and so that's what they learn here. It's funny, though, when they stood this up and they made a decision to make them warrant officers, and not just warrant officers, but warrant ones. So every other warrant officer in the Navy comes from the fleet as an enlisted sailor. Some of these folks are direct commission warrant officers, like the Army with their helicopter pilots. The Navy did not have the Warrant Officer 1 rank. So sort of the interesting stuff that comes out of this is that, oh, we don't have that rank. We don't have any insignia. Wow. Where do we get insignia from? Who makes that? Drano here, Commander Sparrow, has done just a lot of extra heavy lifting about all the things that nobody thought about. We need shoulder boards. We need collar insignia for these guys. And then for those that don't know, warrant officers in the Navy wear rank on one collar, and then they wear a device that's indicative of what field they're in, right? So there was no field indicator. A bosun's mate warrant wears crossed anchors on one collar point. We didn't have any of that. So they had to come up with that. And so it's a Pegasus now, right? So that's their branch indicator or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, we had to have Warrant Officer 1 shoulder boards made. The wings had to be made. The Marine Corps had essentially drone pilot wings already, but they modified them slightly for the Navy. And so there was all these other things that had to happen. So MQ-25 getting still built, still developed, but the other side of that people don't think about is the personnel side. We have to have the operators. We have to have those folks to actually operate the equipment. Yeah, so we're doing that here in Pensacola.
Commodore, one of the things I mentioned earlier, and I want to circle back to it, is our allies and our foreign partners. I won't mention any country names, of course, but again, we have partners that train with us now. There's even future countries, other folks that have expressed interest. Why is that? Because I imagine, right, the 479th is just down the road. They could train with the Air Force too, but for some reason they've desired to train with us and learn the naval aviation way of doing things. Why is that, do you think?
I think some of it is just historical. I think some of it is, the Germans, for example. Back in the day when I went through, they had German Navy Tornado pilots that were in VT-86. Well, now it's the German Air Force, and the German Navy folks are up at Whiting. There's sort of this vestigial thing about it. It could be the platform. Somebody buys a P-8. The Air Force doesn't fly P-8s, so you got to do it that way. But yeah, there's been a lot of international interest in our programs here. Of course, they buy the toy, you got to have an operator. So, it's all usually packaged up together that we train the folks as well. So, same thing up in Whidbey Island for that matter. Australians bought the Growler. Well, the Australians come to Whidbey Island for the RAG. So we have an Australian contingent that's up at Whidbey Island. So we got a lot of friends, is the bottom line, and we're a friendly bunch of people. So, of course, people are going to stop by wanting to join the party.
When you went through the syllabus, you were a T2 guy.
Correct.
And now you're a T-45 guy flying in the back of the Goshawk. We didn't really talk about the Guppy, Super Guppy, the T2 much, right. But what's it like flying the T-45? Is it something is that airplane, like you said, you've got a little bit of that time in the Super Hornet, but tons of time in the Growler, tons of time in the Prowler. Does it really get our folks ready in the JMTS, all the systems, the incredible cockpit that airplane has? Is it really a good stepping stone for the future?
Well, first I'll do a quick memory I have of the T2. So T2 Buckeye, twin engine, which was kind of cool because I realized the other day that I hadn't flown in a single engine aircraft since the T-34 when I came back down here. However, my very first T2 flight, I'm an ensign. I get called at home on a Sunday. I was going to have this thing Monday morning. And I'm not going to do the voice, but I'm just going to say that there was an instructor at VT-86 who was extremely Puerto Rican, to the point at which it was hard to understand him. Captain Rodriguez, a Harrier pilot. So he calls me up and he says, hey, it's Chi-Chi. That was his call sign. And I was like, huh? It's Chi-Chi, man. Like, I'm just supposed to know. It's Captain Rodriguez. Oh, hey, sir. Hey. But he tells me, he goes, hey, tomorrow we got this flight. I want you to come in 30 minutes early because I got to show you this plane. And man, it is a POS. So I really want you to come in. So I come in early and he goes off for like 20 minutes while we're walking around this thing in a very strong Puerto Rican accent about this is a piece of, this. Those that don't know, it had tip tanks with windows that had a piece of cork floating in them. That's how you knew how much gas was in them. It didn't have a gas gauge. They told us in the ground school that, hey, listen, this is one of the first ejection seats ever made. So it's essentially a 105 howitzer round, the explosive charge just underneath. So it's just going to blow you out of the plane, and it's not going to be nice about it. You will be an inch shorter if you have to punch out of this thing. It had crazy EPs. It had like 39 boldface items. It was nuts. The number of boldface you had to memorize for that. The spin recovery was like 2 paragraphs long. It was just insane. So is the T-45 an upgrade? Yes.
Easiest question of the day.
Yes.
Perfect.
It's funny, having flown both the Prowler and the Super Hornet, the T-45 is in some ways like its love child. It has a single engine that is a turbofan, but it has no afterburner. It acts a lot like the Prowler did in terms of throttle response. Well, not throttle response, but just overall acceleration on the takeoff roll, acceleration at altitude. You get the thing going, you can't get it stopped, kind of like the Prowler was. The Prowler is very fast at low altitude, extremely fast. Like I've done 575 knots in a Prowler, down low. It is fast. And so is the Goshawk if you can get it spooled up. Inside, you've got multifunction displays like in the Hornet, yet you have steam gauges, like you did in the Prowler. It sort of tells you maintenance codes, but not really. It's just, I did an FCF flight a couple days ago, and we were going up, and we had to check pressurization on like 40,000 feet, which is something we had to do in the Prowler. And up there, they would decompress all the time. I mean, I've had like 2 or 3 rapid decompressions doing FCFs in the Prowler. So there was sort of this expectation of, maybe that'll happen. The Super Hornet doesn't do that. So it's very reminiscent of the Prowler in a lot of ways. It's also very small. So it is not made for corn-fed Americans like myself.
I don't know if you remember it, sir. I will definitely remember it. But the first time we met, when you were, I don't know, you say PXO, XO, CO. Is there a P commo? Like
there's a P Commodore, the Perspective Commodore.
Perspective. Okay, well, right. You were P Commodore at the time. On the flight schedule for us over at 10, it's called FITSE. Mm-hmm. So basically, you are going through getting your instructor quals, and one of the kind of the cool parts of that process is you're going to sit down with a rep from each of the squadrons, from 10, from 4, from 86, an instructor pilot, right? And basically, you get to kind of ask questions. And I'll be honest, I wasn't even flying that day, and we call it selling a flight, selling an event. One of our instructors basically was like, "Hey, I got a medical event or something going on that day. I need to sell this event." And I remember just saying FITSE, and okay, sure, yeah, I'll go, man. It's not, I'm not going to get to fly. I'm going to go do something and talk to new instructors, right? That's kind of cool. And it was really neat. There's only one person in this group, and it's an 06. Well, that's kind of strange. Oh, I'll bet it's going to be the new Commodore. And the reason I mention that is I could tell from some of the kind of the questions you asked and the things that you wanted to know, you cared very deeply. I can tell pretty clearly you care very deeply about the job. From the JO side, from an instructor pilot side, that's definitely appreciated. I hope the students feel it. I hope they appreciate that as well. Your predecessor, his predecessor, Muscle, and then obviously Mongo before, like, all wonderful people. So I can't rank you because everyone I've known in this job has been great. And maybe that's why we put really great people behind the desk. But as I'm leaving here, for those who the heck knows when I will release this, I have quite the backlog. Sure. But I'm leaving the job. I'm going on to do other things. But it's really cool to see the place in just as great of a place as it felt like when I got here. Just like you said, we all start here and we all want to claw our way back to Pensacola. It is a special place. It is a special wing, but it's because of the people. So anyway, I have great memories. I have wonderful things to think of, and I hope that this place will go on to that next generation, right? Like there's always a need. And I have my friends that are pilots. What's it like training backseaters? And it's a very different conversation. It's a very different skill set than the pilot side, right? But just as important. And that's what I try to impress to all the students. I say that past tense, what I used to do, right? In the job, as of like 2 weeks ago, sadly. There's a reason you're in the airplane. There's a reason you're in that crew station. And I have flown with some great backseaters, and I've flown with some that, what's the old saying? I'd rather have the gas, right? Right. You get to choose. You get to decide. You get to be mission critical. But it's an active choice, and I've flown with some incredibly wonderful folks. And again, I know that's going to be the tradition of excellence going forward. But anyway, that's my little pontification here at the end. But as we kind of wrap things up, always like to ask, and you mentioned a couple times, cricket call sign. Yep. What the heck is it an acronym? What's the story?
So my last name's White. And so when I was going through flight school, I got Vanna and Snow and stuff like that, Lily and whatever.
The softballs,
right. And then I showed up at the squadron, and jet got put in the water the day after I got there. They then found out that I was on a boat debt where they lost a Prowler in the RAG. The guy in the jet was my roommate. They started calling me Black Cloud and Voodoo, and then they decided that Voodoo sounded too cool. We can shorten that to VD. Yeah. That's more Navy. And so they were calling me VD for a while, and I'm like, awesome, I'm going to have to explain this to my mother and any potential mate that I ever meet. So this is fantastic. And then I get scheduled for my very first front seat flight at the boat. So I have to preface this just a little bit. So I talked about before we got out there, and then we didn't fly for a long time. So months had gone by. You never fly in the front seat at the boat in the RAG at all. As a student, if you're a student ECMO, you do not fly in the front seat at the boat because there's an instructor ECMO up there trying to get the student pilot qualified at the boat. You never do it. At the time, you got one simulator on boat procedures. So I'm on the boat. I get put on the schedule for this. I'd done one backseat flight like 3 days before. And then prior to that, I hadn't flown since the RAG. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And not only that, but they scheduled me for a level 2 event. So when you flew the Prowler, there's this thing called a BAM, a basic aerobatic maneuver. And so you would go up there and you basically would talk the pilot through all these aerobatic maneuvers, barrel rolls, wing overs, ML1s, half cubanate, like all this stuff, right? And so it was like you'd sit over on the right side. You're like, okay, bring the nose up, stop, roll, turn, whatever, all this stuff, right? You're just dictating what to do. So I'm like, okay, great. Well, I got to go do a bunch of rote memorization here. I got to review all that. All right, I got to go look at boat procedures. All right, we're in the Persian Gulf. It's daytime. Okay, we'll be case 1. Easy day. Don't have to talk on the radio. Awesome. For those that don't know, when you ride in the front seat of the Prowler, you're the guy talking on the radio. And you always talk on the radio in a Growler. If you're the NFO, the pilot does not speak on the radio, which is different than the Air Force. But anyway, I digress. So off I go to my stateroom to study, and I bust out the NATOPS, and case 1's in there. Okay, we'll study all that stuff. Great. Got to look up all these maneuvers. Awesome. The next day comes. I go to the radio room. I brief this thing. I've got a department head pilot, the skipper of the squadron, and another department head. They're in the back seat, and I'm up front. So we make it to the plane. We get up on the flight deck. I get myself loaded into the front seat. I make it to the catapult. The other thing you had to do as ECMO 1 was roger up the wakeboard. So for those that don't know, this is the setting that the catapult is set at. So how hard it throws you. This needs to be absolutely correct, because if it's not enough, you don't fly at the end of the catapult stroke.
It's a short flight. How about
It's a short flight, yeah.
Right to the water.
Yeah, right to the water. 90 feet down.
It's a 0.1 for the logbook.
Yeah,
sir.
right. Yeah, I mean, true. You round up, right? So anyway, so I get the wakeboard, rogered, and off we go. Case 1, out we do the thing. I get through the BAM, and we get ready to come back, and I check in with the boat, and I say, hey, Mother's case 3. I'm like, what?
But I know case 1.
As this, just savage panic attack is welling up inside me, because I hadn't done case 3 procedures since the one simulator that I mentioned, probably 9 months before, something like that. And so I'm frantically hitting the way back button in my mind, trying to get back to this. And so for those that don't know, this is like a bad weather recovery, and you have to go out to this holding point, and at a certain time, you're released out of the holding point, and you come down, and then you drive in at 1,200 feet, inside of 10 miles directly at the carrier, and then there's a landing system on the back of the boat, the ball that you use to land the plane. So to complicate all this, the Prowler at this stage of the game was an analog aircraft that had a lot of digital instruments that they'd put into it. And so sometimes things were lost in translation between analog and digital, to include the fuel gauge. So we had a digital fuel gauge, but the sensors and stuff in the tank were still analog. And so lots of times we'd have ghost fuel. And when I say ghost fuel, the gauge would say that you had fuel in the tank when you really didn't. And so that affected the totalizer and how much total fuel you had. It would do the math for you. The old version, you had to sit there and hit all these buttons and then manually add the tanks up to come up with your total fuel load. But this did the math for you, except when it did it wrong, and then you had to do it again. So anyway, this thing's saying that there is fuel in the wing tanks. Well, this is very bad. You can't trap aboard the ship with fuel in the wing tanks, because it'll slosh forward and destroy a wing structure inside the wing. So that's a huge no-no. So pilot's very concerned about this, and rightly so. Had like the dumps open, and he's telling me to look out at the wingtip, because that's where it came out in the Prowler, and there was one in the tail too, but you never ever opened that, because half the time it would never shut. And then you would lose all your fuselage fuel, which is what fed the engines, and then your flight came to a screeching halt. So you never touch that one. So he's got the wing dumps open, and there's nothing coming out, and this and the other. And okay, so we're in Marshall. I managed to get it all, copied down and read back to him. And, the cardinal sin is not sounding cool on the radio. Everything else can just be going to hell, as long as you sound cool on the radio. Also, as another aside, there is a thing called the PlatCam, which is in the flight deck, and it has a set of crosshairs on it, and that is the perfect glide slope coming in to land on the boat. And it's in black and white, and they use this as a tool to help the pilots learn how to fly better at the boat. Also on this is the frequency that you talk to the boat on, and it's recorded on there, and they record these passes so that the pilots can look at them later. So it's on closed circuit TV, being broadcasted around the ship. Everybody in the squadron knows that this is my first front seat flight, so they're going to come literally with popcorn to see how new guy's going to do with his ball call. So we get pushed out of Marshall. We're still messing around with the fuel. I'm starting to remember more about case 3. We're 1,200 feet driving in inside of 10 miles. I'm like, okay, great. I think things are stabilized. Awesome. What else do I need to do here? What else do I need to do? Oh man, I really can't screw up that ball call. Okay, let's practice this in my mind. Okay, they're going to say, 500, 3/4 mile, call a ball. I'm going to say 500, Prowler ball. 8.8, like super cool, like ice cold. So I'm rehearsing that in my mind. Okay, what else do I need to do? Okay, I remember now. In the RAG, they told us to lower our seats in terminal phases of flight, because when you eject, you go through the canopy. And so this ejection seat had breakers, little spikes on the top of it to break the canopy. Well, if you're a tall guy like me, you normally ride with your head above the seat. So, hey, you know what? That's a good idea. I should do that. In the Prowler, the pilot already set higher on the left a little bit. Okay, so I proceed to just put this thing on the floorboard. So I am now on the floorboard looking up at the pilot. There was a big dash in front of you, and the radar boot, and the radar display, and all that stuff was there too. The plane has a big bulbous nose. And while I'm sure told that, it comes in at 17, the approach AOA is 17 units, it didn't really take seat in my mind, or I didn't understand what that meant. It doesn't really make a difference, because then when we hit 3/4 of a mile, I am on the floorboard. I can't see anything. The boat goes, 500, 3/4 of a mile, call the ball. And I get out a 500. And then I'm like, oh, crap. In that split second, I looked around. All I could see was sky and clouds. I had this thought of like, wow, I really thought I'd be able to see the boat from here. And I look over at the pilot. He's from Mississippi. And on from the intercom, he just drawls, ball. And I get out, ball? After we touch down. Or right as we're touching down, right? In the wires. So we're in the wires now.
It counts. I mean, you got it out.
And the LSO goes, yeah, Roger, ball. To my credit, the pilot was supposed to tell me that he had a ball before this happened. I couldn't remember what the word was when the pilot doesn't have a ball, Clara. But, my infant mind couldn't think of that at the time. So we're in the wires. You got to fold the wings in. That was ECMO 1's job, too. So I'm reaching down. We call it the bear trap, because it was this flap that you had to stick your hand into and then flip a switch inside it to release the electrical lock. And then you pulled this big lever up, and half the time they would stick. I'm like yanking on this thing, and you literally could rip it off. So the pilot's like, easy there, big boy. We finally get out of the LA, and they have to the maintainers have to grab the wingtips and bounce up and down on these things, or you get the Grumman salute, which is one wing came up and the other one didn't. So anyway, we're pulling out, and the pilot goes, well, good job. You did pretty well with the flight. Yeah, ball call probably could have gone a little better. Other ECMO's probably going to talk to you about that. And so in the time it took me to get out of the plane, go through maintenance, and walk back in the ready room, there was about 10 different names. And I won't tell you what the first 4 were, but number 5 was Cricket. And I didn't fight back on Cricket. Because on the plat camera footage, there was a 500 and then 4 seconds of silence and then ball. So nothing but the sound of crickets, in the interim.
What a story. What an experience. Thank you so much for telling all these wonderful stories of your career, sir. I know there's still more to go. And all these, again, with gratitude. Thank you, again, for sitting down and taking the time. But then also you get the last word. So you get to close us out. Anything maybe I didn't ask, or anything you want to say?
Gemma, hey, again, thank you so much for the opportunity with this. You touched on it a little bit before, but I truly do feel like I'm on the lottery with this job. And when you come down here as an NFO and you just have this, I guess it's reverence, really, is the feeling. You realize that this entire operation has been put in your hands. It didn't hit me till I got down here, honestly, that, hey, the Navy said you're in charge of making every single naval flight officer for the Navy. There's multiple places that make pilots. There's multiple places that make SWOs. When that starts sinking in, you're like, wow, I have kind of this sacred responsibility. You touched on the previous Commodores and the why, and that's at least part of it. It certainly is a huge part of it for me. It's your last kind of give back to the organization in a truly impactful way, I think. I'll have 25 years at the end of this. So it's almost poetic, really. It's full circle. It's right back where you started. I feel it every month when I go in there for a wing. So thanks so much again for the opportunity to come and tell my sea stories for whatever they're worth. And best of luck to you in the future. You're going to do great.
Thanks, as always, for taking the time and tuning in to Safe on Deck. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It shouldn't need to be said, but just in case, I'll say it. The views and opinions presented on Safe on Deck are my own and those of my guests, and do not represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or its components. Be well, blue skies, and fly safe out there. See you next time.
PC idle, wings level, deploy over Safe on Deck.